Hello and welcome to the Cuyamaga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, advisors, volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamaga Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness in the human experience, following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, and exploration. We respect the path of academic balance, creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of the deeper human connection to all of life. It's part of our mission to expand our own experiential research with the multidisciplinary understanding that's available to us today. So, as an educational institution, we take an open approach, and we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. And on these weekly Sunday discussions, we've had a full spectrum of topics, from the arts to the sciences, and so much more. And you're welcome to visit our website at cuyamagainstitute.com. All of our presentations are free, and as a nonprofit, of course, we invite you to become a supporting member, join our community, and we want to thank you, the community members, who continue to support the mission of the Cuyamaga Institute. Our guest today will share his stunning images of the Great Murals of the Baja California peninsula of Mexico, where a hunter-gatherer culture some 7,500 years ago created up to 10-foot tall paintings on vertical cliff walls. This was a culture that endured with a shared symbolic view of the world, expressed in rock art with vivid colors, depicting large spirit figures and local fauna. And this is in a very remote area. It's located mostly in the wilderness, and there's no roads, and many of the sites can only be reached by mural caravans.
Perhaps that's why it's not as well known, though it should be, as many other sites. And of this early Baja culture, we could ask, what does it indicate when we see the similar forms in a similar style repeated over and over and over again on so many sites and over many thousands of years? Does that imply a deeply shared cultural vision and purpose, cosmology, spiritual faith? What is it? What can we decode of that? Can we make the leap here that rock art with some geometric symbols are signs of the entoptic phenomenon, geometry seen during an altered state of consciousness? A lot of research done on that, and accessed through many modalities, not all of them requiring plant medicine. Our work demonstrates how readily and easily our physiology can enter ecstatic altered states without drugs or plants. It's truly part of our DNA. And can we truly understand these cultures who left such marks of their spirit journeys without taking into account what they saw in such visionary states? And can we, in our cushy, comfortable, relatively danger-free lifestyle today, where we've conquered much of nature, at least temporarily, can we truly understand what life was like 7,000, 5,000, 3,000 years ago for a culture that endured so many millennia? Our guide today to the Great Murals of Baja is Dr. Todd Bostwick. He's had a long and interesting career. He's taught archaeology, anthropology, and history at Arizona State University and Northern Arizona University. He served as the Phoenix City Archaeologist for 21 years at the Pueblo Ground Museum, and as the Director of Archaeology at the nearby to us, Verde Valley Archaeology Center, just up the road. He's been awarded by the National Park Service, the Arizona Archaeological Society, the State Historic Preservation Office, the Arizona Governor's Archaeology Advisory Commission, the Society for Cultural Astronomy of the American Southwest, and the City of Phoenix, where he formed one of the most comprehensive city archaeology programs in the country that helped recover information from sites that would otherwise have been destroyed by construction projects. Rock art has long been a focus of Todd's research. He's a pioneer in the recording and researching of Hohokam rock art, and brought rock art into mainstream archaeology there. His book, Landscape of the Spirits, Hohokam Rock Art in the South Mountain Park, is thoroughly researched, an important book. He's also written books on the life and careers of some trailblazing archaeologists. One of note is Byron Cummings. I appreciate those who memorialize the contributions of those no longer here. He's written about how Byron Cummings gained control over Arizona archaeology, wresting it from the Eastern institutions that wanted to control it. And as he saw, quote, the Southwest as an American wilderness where the story of cultural development revealed by the archaeologist and the anthropologist was as important here as it was in Europe. That's groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Other titles, and these are of particular interest, Viewing the Sky Through Past and Present Cultures, Desert Farmers at the River's Edge. This is on the largest pre-industrial canal system in the world, built by the ancient Hohokam, with over 1,000 miles of canals. Pretty remarkable for a pre-industrial and early society. The archaeology of ancient tactical sites, the archaeology of the Pueblo Grande platform mounds, very interesting. And with Ken Zoll, another of our guests, he wrote Ancient Verde Valley Family Life, the Sinagua at the Dick Cliff Dwelling. And he wrote a book on the solar gnomons of the V-Bar-V Heritage Site. So, wow, Todd, what a great career. You have been in the field as much as you've been in the office and in the classroom. You've been out adventuring, and your adventures in the Baja Peninsula are just one of many. So I appreciate your coming here to tell us about this extraordinary site, and welcome.
Thank you. I should mention also that one of the interesting things for me about my career is that I've been involved with all the different types of organizations. So in other words, I worked for a private research company. I worked for a large municipality, City of Phoenix, worked for universities, and also I worked for nonprofits. So I pretty much covered the whole sphere of the
Whole spectrum.
Spectrum of types of archaeology you can get involved with. And that's been very rewarding because, you meet different kinds of people, and it's not only the professionals, but also the avocationalists who are very enthusiastic about what they're doing and are very knowledgeable. And so it's been a really enjoyable career to encounter so many different views of people and how they love archaeology.
And also taking it to the grassroots so that all of us can enjoy our shared world heritage on this and celebrate these cultures. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's been noted that, quote, the media available to these artists of old were far more limited than the range of ideas that they attempt to express. And I think that's such an interesting idea. So when we try to decode rock art, we need to understand that there's so many multiple purposes and rituals behind the art and these shared motifs, from the notes of spirit journeys by the shamans to various rites of passage, to recording mythic personas and their tales, to celestial events, to annual ceremonies noted on a solar calendar, to the insignia of clans and guilds. How do you look at that?
Well, as a scientist, you have really two forms of information that you deal with. One is, of course, the literature and the work that your colleagues are doing, and that's the scientific part of it. But also, I would argue that your own personal experiences have a big impact
Thank you.
on how you see the people that you're studying. And fortunately, I've been involved with Native American groups since I was very young. In fact, even when I was in high school, I had several Native American friends back in Nevada. And so I've always had that wealth of information that I could draw on, not just from my colleagues, but also from the Native Americans who are my friends and are willing to share certain things with me. So that's been very rewarding as well.
We're
Mm.
now listening to their insights and their cultural perspective and their decodings. And that's an important piece of the puzzle now, isn't it?
I think we've
Yes.
been listening, but the listening has expanded finally,
Yeah.
greater volume of listening. Yeah.
And your personal experiences, you will share some of those with us. Is that why it's so important to do the field work and be on site and let that artwork, that landscape speak to you directly?
Well, yes, that's a very good point. I've always thought that the most important part of telling an archaeology story is providing context.
Yeah.
And context can mean a lot of different things, but it clearly means being present within an environment that has an impact on those people that created their art or did their rituals. And so, you can look at books and you can look at photos and you can read all kinds of studies, but it's not the same as actually being present
Yeah.
at the site.
Because they are responding to and they've been shaped by their landscape.
Exactly.
From-
And not only that, but there's subtleties to the interpretation of the landscape that require multiple efforts to recognize. And I always went back to a rock art site that I was recording many times because every time I went back, there's something new that I saw. You
Mm.
can't just go out and do a recording and then you're done and then interpret it. I
Right.
found if I go back again and again, the story fleshes out even more. And it's because I think in our society, we don't pay attention to the details of nature as much as Native Americans did and still do in many
Right.
cases, unless you make an effort.
Mm.
So context, again, is so important, and being present, that's why field work is, I always say, well, yeah, I was an administrator and I ran a large program, but I'm a dirt archaeologist. I
Yeah.
always like to say I'm a dirt archaeologist because get out there and get your hands dirty and see it, as close as you can, and you'll get insights through that process.
And
We mustn't.
there's a power of place that kind of resonates
Yeah.
once you're there. I mean, my first experience of going to Chaco Canyon was life changing. I mean, to see the construction, the atmosphere, the intelligence. I mean, all of that just all of a sudden just shook my world. You can read about it in a book, but going there and experiencing
Yes.
it,
Mhm.
it changes your worldview.
Yes.
We also have to understand how enclosed we are,
Mhm.
how insulated we are from nature today.
Yeah.
So when we go out in nature for an extended period of time, it just changes us, our perspective, our experience of the
Mhm.
world.
Mhm.
So imagine living in that full time.
Yeah.
So can we make the leap here that the rock art is what indicative of entoptic phenomenon? You've seen a site with many geometric symbols. Do you partake of these are shamanic recordings? These are people that had mystical experiences and valued them, and maybe that these images are part of spirit journeys or an altered state. Where do you sit on that spectrum?
Well, I actually have personally experienced altered states of consciousness when I was younger, in formal settings. And the experience was very consistent with interpreting rock art as a spiritual event, as a means to communicate with the ancestors, or even just as a means to reinforce your life or your community life views.
Mhm.
And so I have always thought that whatever we are experiencing when we go to a site, it's never going to be the same as the Native Americans that created the site. But that doesn't mean that we can't try.
Mm.
I've had colleagues say, "Oh, you'll never know what the rock art means." But if you have a defeatist attitude like that, then how do we ever advance, our knowledge? And I think just also when you have a whole career of looking at these kind of things, you seem to develop greater insight through time. There's something about being an elderly person that actually provides you with a deeper understanding of the phenomena that you've been dealing with.
Mm.
So in a way, I appreciate getting older because I seem to appreciate more of what I'm studying.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost
And
like
there's,
it's almost like it's an encoded hall of records that
oh,
they're putting
yes,
down
yeah.
the data of their experience, but maybe for the next generation to follow that they're documenting those key elements of their experience, whether it's encoded ritual understanding or some other aspect to it. We can continue to speculate, but the reality is that there's something powerful there that goes way beyond
Resonates.
what we think about
Mhm.
as aesthetic art or something like that. I mean, it goes way to something.
I was thinking about the plethora and the cacophony of symbols that we're assaulted with today, and how it's these same symbols over and over through rock art across the world so early on.
Right.
That is so powerful, that still speaks to us, that there's something living within us still. And just the power of symbol, the power of art,
Mhm.
and how it captivates us still to this day.
Yeah.
So this is a very potent language that they're speaking.
If I could go back to something that you guys just said, and that was the phrase power of place. I think
Mhm.
that's a really good phrase, power of place, because I always, when I go to a site, it doesn't even have to be a rock art site, it could be another kind of site.
Yeah.
Uh, I I feel the power of place when I go to these places, and I'm hesitate to talk too much about it with my colleagues because, oh, that's a feeling, that's an emotion, you're supposed to be objective. But as I said earlier, I don't think that we really can be objective because part of our own way to understand life around us and to communicate what we think we see, uh, is complicated
Multifaceted.
and multifaceted. And that's the thing too. When you speak to Native Americans about the rock art, they will say, "Well, there's multiple meanings.
Mhm.
Look at, this person over there could say that this represents this." For example, the spiral. Spirals are very common in North American rock art and elsewhere in the world for that matter. And the Hopi have said, well, the spirals are representing the journey of life. But then other Hopi say, oh no, they represent direction. The way that the spiral is turning means it's telling you it's a certain direction or orientation. And so I asked him, well, how do I choose which one it is? And he said, you don't have to. It's both. And a lot of rock art probably has multiple meanings. And so it's really up to the individual that's experiencing it to put it into their own cognitive framework and see
It
how.
almost asks you to enter into an expanded
Yes,
state of
that's a good
awareness, doesn't
point.
it? Mhm.
Yeah.
The rock art a lot of times for me is begging me to figure it out, and a lot of times you don't really know for sure, but you have guesses, and that's great. That's good. That's how we learn is guessing and then testing and seeing more. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, I appreciate you scientists who are also mystics. So we need more of you.
yeah.
Um, so you have such a long career, especially in the Southwest. We hope you will come back and talk to us about the Hohokam and the solar calendars and the BFRB and other sites. But today, these great murals, where and when, where did that catch your interest? When did you take this 5-day mule trek to go see these very remote sites? You've been there a couple of times. You say you almost died. So there's a drama right there. I mean, that will take you from life to death to rebirth, at least in an emotional
Near
way.
death.
So tell us about your adventures. Where do we begin? And you've got a slideshow for us.
Okay. Well, these particular sites have been on my bucket list for a long time, and I'm my career has been one of where I do my research, I do my work, I do my public speaking. And then when I go on vacation, I go only to major rock art sites or major sites of some kind. So it's like a busman's holiday, It's just archaeology all the time. Fortunately, I have a wife who puts up with it and she goes with me and she's not an archaeologist. And in fact, we just this summer, we went to Stonehenge and I managed to get tickets, rare tickets to go to the interior of the Stonehenge after it was closed.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's one.
And, I mean, all I could say was, wow. I mean, I could
I've
feel
been
the
there.
power of
Yeah,
that place.
wow.
Not being out looking at it, but actually being inside the circle itself with
Mhm.
only a handful of other people. it had a big impact on me. I mean, I felt it, and it, when I left, I felt it for a long time. So, you know, those kind of experiences are personal, and yet it made me rethink what I think is going on in Stonehenge by being able to go inside it and feel it and have the experience of the full body experience. So again, you know, when you do this enough and you're obsessed with it, and I agree, I'm obsessed with archaeology, but to me, it's always been actually a spiritual quest from the very beginning.
Love it. Yeah.
Because it's it's an it's a way to learn about how people view their world, how they viewed it, what was important to them, and all of those things that I learned from my archaeology experiences, I think are relevant to any research that I do. Because you can put some
Thank
context to
you.
it again. The context is again the
Because
key
those
word
people
here.
were certainly on a spiritual quest.
Oh well, it was the core of their being.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
I mean, the Hopi, I always use the Hopi as good examples because we have so much information from them, but they believe that every person has a spiritual responsibility to the world,
Mm.
to
Yeah.
ensure that their behavior is appropriate and is acceptable, and therefore will bring goodwill upon their community.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And so,
Would we all believe that in our society?
If
Wow.
everyone took on that philosophy, the world would shift
Yeah.
dramatically.
yeah, it would be, but so it's a personal thing, archaeology. And I think a lot of times people, if they're honest, they will tell you that it's a personal quest is why they're doing archaeology.
Yeah.
Just to
And
contribute to the literature and make discoveries, but it's a personal experience that you deeply are seeking and hopefully are having a positive impact on you.
and from a privileged seat as well.
Yeah,
You get access that the rest of us may.
Well, it's
Yeah.
true. I have to admit it. I've gone places that other people can't go because I'm an archaeologist. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
it's funny because this is a little side note, but I've always been intrigued by this. As an archaeologist, people either love me or hate me. And they love me because they love archaeology, or they love hearing about it or meeting people that's their career. On the other hand, there's also a large number of people, uh, in particular developers and those people that are trying to build things, that hate archaeologists, because
Mhm.
it's time and money. So into a room for a meeting, in my mind, I think, okay, how many of the people love me in here and how many of the people hate me in here? And how am I going to address, both crowds in the meeting and make sure
Yeah.
both of them are happy? So
Well, you
uh,
did a study on what was under the Phoenix airport. So I mean,
several, yeah,
poke a hole in the ground here and you're going to find archaeology. So it seems.
it's
Yeah.
everywhere. In the Phoenix area, sites are everywhere.
So the Baja California Peninsula of Mexico. Tell us a
Okay,
bit
the
about the
reason-
culture.
And,
Yeah.
and you can launch it.
Yeah, the reason that I was so fascinated with it is because it's really unusual. It's spectacular.
Mhm.
Colors, you don't see the colors, pictograph.
Like pinks and
Not
oranges.
as common in
greens.
other parts of the
Mhm.
America. And there they have, well, I'll talk about the colors and it's also it's remote, and therefore to me that was a great place to go have a spiritual quest and still do archaeology. You
Yeah.
got to go on a mule, which was very rugged country, primitive camping, no electricity, and it's a full body experience, as I would call it. And those kind of experiences I think have a greater impact on than just getting out of the car and walking to something and looking at it. When you have to earn it, you have to work for it. Because most people in the Eastern religion will talk about you earn your spiritual qualities through your actions and your behavior and the things that you choose to do in your life. But you know, it's really up to the individual to interpret the experiences and then use those. I like being an archaeologist because I can talk about what I'm doing and what I'm thinking, and people want to know.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of funny. in a way
Fascinating
that
across the board.
you go into a party and, I have to ask the question, okay, do I want to tell people I'm an archaeologist or not? Because if I do, the whole night people are going to be wanting to talk to me and ask me questions and, learn about what it's like being an archaeologist. It's
That's
okay,
being
but-
popular.
Yeah, it's very popular. Unless there's a developer or somebody in the room, then, so.
Not so popular.
These are just little anecdotal stories.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the rock art. So I finally got a chance because the California Rock Art Foundation does regular trips down there once or twice or so. And so I went with him the first time because I thought, okay, I don't want to go with a tour guide that's just going to be making up stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of tour guides do. I want to go some professionals who can really provide some context, again, that word for me. So I did it, and I liked it so much the first time, which was March of last year, that I went again in November of last year. A different location, but same region.
Wow.
And that's the one where I was barely able to make it out. I'd gotten sick, not unbeknownst to me. I had bleeding ulcers.
Mm.
Oh.
And but I did make it out okay. But it was interesting mixing the ecstatic experience of the rock art and then barely making it out on the mule and then having to be hospitalized afterwards. I thought, well, spiritual journeys involve both experiences.
Yeah.
Wow.
Both pleasant and not so pleasant, because they're both providing a context. I mean, there's nothing like doing what I thought was a spiritual experience and also, taking photos and notes from my own research, but and then to have to deal with a health issue that you didn't know you had at the same time is really a full experience in a way that's hard to describe.
Yeah.
And
There's
gives you
nothing
plenty
like-
of downtime to really contemplate those
Well,
big
that's it. I really, for the first time, I was slowing down. My mind is always going, so
Yeah.
never stops. I don't know, curse of an archaeologist or just me, but yeah, the thing is, when you have such an exhilarating life experience like that, and then you have one that's not so exhilarating, you really stop and think, okay, what's important in my life? Why is it that that I had to deal with both? And you realize, well, that's what life is. It is both. And
The
both of them
hero's
are
journey
spiritual
does
experiences.
include the dark night of the soul. A few
Yes,
episodes of
it
that.
does. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, but let's
One of
focus
the
on
passages.
the rock art now.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the individuals that have done the major research there. And then I have a lot of slides I want to show of the different kinds of images and what we've learned about how they're depicted and how they're grouped together and the kinds of locations that they're at. So are we ready to do that?
Let's launch it. Good.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the Great Murals of Baja California. And I've subtitled it, A Glimpse into the Spirit World or the Ancient Hunter-Gatherers. And I'll try to explain why that's my main interpretation as we move on. Okay, so we're going to be looking in the area of central Baja, California. So it's essentially the northern part of southern Baja. Baja is actually two different Mexican states, northern Baja and southern Baja, and most of the rock art is in the northern part of the southern part of the Baja South. There's four major mountain ranges that there is rock art present in, and as you can see, there's more than 1,150 sites that have been recorded so far in the Baja area, which is a lot, and there's probably a lot more yet to be recorded. The most well-known is the one in the Sierra de San Francisco area, which I'll be showing you quite a bit. That's where there are no roads and you have to take mule caravans in. But there's also really spectacular rock art in to the south in the Sierra de Guadalupe that you can drive into and then hike and see the sites there. And we'll look at some of those sites as well. Now, this map shows all of Baja and the different native groups that live there. And the group for the main rock art areas are the Cochimi. And the Cochimi were hunter-gatherers, even in historic times. And they knew about the rock art. And when they were interviewed by the padres that came, the missionaries, they said, that's not ours. We did not create that rock art. And we don't know anything about it, but we think it was created by giants. Now, whether that means that they were actually giants or that they were impressed by the very large size of some of the human figures, we're not sure, but clearly they do not associate with the rock art, which tells us that it's older than their culture is. And I want to just point out on this map, the Sierra de San Francisco has 3 or 4 main areas that you can go into. I went into the 2 of them, these 2, and again, all by mule. Okay. Crosby is a person who wrote a book, really excellent book, probably the best book on rock art of Baja, actually. And he created some maps by dividing different rock art areas into different subculture areas. And I want to just point out a few things here before we move into the sites that I looked at, is that these figures here are the famous figures of Baja. They're anthropomorphs. And a lot of times they're bicolor. Half of the body is red or black. And there are females as depicted with their breasts off to the side. And there's one site where there's male genitalia, but the male genitalia are not very common. So a lot of times we don't know the gender or sex of an individual. Okay, first, just let me point out that the San Francisco area, again, where we'll be focusing on that and also down here, is part of a larger area that Crosby defined as the Great Mural, but I think really it should be more focused in the central part of it here, and I'll explain why. You can see on the red on granite, it has human figures, but they're not anything like the mural figures here. As you can see, the differences are much simpler design, one color. And then when you go ahead on down here, they start to change as well. And this one right here, the semi-abstract at the very end of this grouping here, is totally different than also the Great Mural style. So I think it's too much grouped into that particular concept, but nonetheless, it's very interesting. Okay, before we get into the images, I want to throw out some ideas that their archaeologists have proposed, and I'll hit on all of these individually. The first one that I personally subscribe to is the shamanic trance state behavior linked to spirit possession and communication with ancestors and myths. So the rock art is a formal way to speak to your ancestors and to communicate about important things that have happened in the past of your people. However, there's reasons to believe that that some of the images may represent metaphors for death and dying, and I'll talk about that. There could be impersonation of ancestors and myth figures. And then it's suggested that some of the rock art might be associated with different lineages, represented by different hairstyles. And their hairstyles get pretty elaborate here. And studies have shown that, let me get my notes here, that there are usually maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 different hairstyles in a particular site. So the question is, why do they have different hairstyles? Is that a personal choice, or archaeologists are suggesting it represents different groups, lineages? There's no way we could confirm that. Whoops, sorry. And then geometric patterns, grids, checkerboards, probably in topic forms. In other words, they're images that you have during trance state. And then warfare between different groups, in other words, enemies. And I'll explain why that is one interpretation. I don't particularly support that one, but okay, so let's start with the first real archaeology done by not an archaeologist, but by industrial chemists, a French industrial chemist who worked for the famous copper mine there. And he, in his explorations for copper, he found the Great Mural rock art. He became fascinated with it. When he ended his 3-year contract, he continued to study the rock art and then actually published a report in 1895. It's a very detailed, extremely important report. Obviously, this well-educated, and there's a lot of things that he talks about in his reports that are still useful today, all the way from the 1890s. Okay, here we're going to go see one of the sites that he visited, San Borjitos. It's one of the sites in the Guadalupe Mountains. You can see you just have this little trail here, and you have what looks like a small rock shelter or alcove. And then when you get close to it, you realize, oh my God, it's the whole ceiling is covered in figures. And when you go inside, you realize it's not a small, it's a very large rock shelter full of rock art. And it's fairly accessible by car and then hiking. So it was fairly well known. And INA, which is the Mexican government's agency for history and archaeology and anthropology, they sent out 2 people to study the site. And one of them was an artist, Barbara Dahlgren, and the other was, an artist, and then the other was an archaeologist, Javier Romero. And they published a report in 1951, and with Barbara's beautiful and very accurate drawing. And this is too big to photograph. So she had to do a series of photographs and then paste them together and then do the drawings. But as you see, it's mostly anthropomorphic figures of all kinds. And notice the arrows that are in the humans, and multiple arrows in some cases. And this is one of the reasons that an archaeologist in California, Don Leylander, who says that this is representing warfare. That's what all the arrows are representing. But it could represent a metaphor for death and not actual warfare. Now, here's another drawing that was done by Camel Grant. He was a well-known person that went around and recorded rock art sites. He was an artist also. And he provided this map. It's a little, or illustration, it's a little different than the other one I just showed you, because this whole section down here was added. But notice the white figure here and this figure here. I want to talk about those. But if you notice, even though this is primarily anthropomorphs, or monos is what they call them in Mexico, look at this individual. It looks like it's a halo. And then there's fish, clearly 1, 2, 3 fish, 4 fish. So you're wondering, what are fish doing in the middle of the desert? Well, these individuals, they migrated, or I should say they took seasonal journeys from Pacific Ocean on the west side or the Sea of Cortez on the east side. And so we do see a lot of sea mammals that are and fish that are depicted in the rock art in the extremely dry area. For example, the Sierra of San Francisco only gets 3.9 inches of rain a year. So it's really dry. Now, one of the things that were identified at this San Borjito site is that there were several different kinds of monos or anthropomorphs. And they call this one a scarecrow and this one a scarecrow. Why, I'm not sure. But what I find intriguing about these individuals here is they look like cactus to me, and maybe they should have been called cactus people. Here's a close-up, and you can see that they're clearly well-defined bodies with the infilling. And one of the interesting things about the rock art of Baja, at least for the Great Mural tradition, all the vast majority of figures start as outlines. So they draw an outline of the figure and then they fill it in. And the fill is often different. As you can see here, here's a sort of a checkerboard lined, and then here's dotted infill, and even different colors of the infill. And here's one that's just a solid red color. So, but they all start as outline. And that might be why they have a limited set of forms that they take, is because as one scholar said, excuse me, the rock art appears to be a codified communication system. In other words, there's the similarity in certain symbols that are spread over a broad area that suggests that it was part of what they call schools of art, actually, where people are learning particular kinds of styles. I wanted to point out, though, when you read the literature, it'll tell you, well, there's so much similarity, but actually, when you look at the art itself, you find there's a lot of difference, a lot of variability going on. For example, this mono here has a penis, which is pretty unusual, and then these claws for feet, and those are very different than the toes that this individual has. So when you look at the details, you realize, okay, it could be schools of art, but there's a lot of variability that's going on here when you really look at it carefully.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Here's two of the scarecrows, so-called scarecrows here in this scene. And I think that these are actually representing the cactus, the famous cordon cactus there. That's you don't have saguaro cactus in Baja, but they have a very similar one called cordon. And I think these lines here, they're cactus people. So what I would then interpret that as being is they're spirits of the cactus, and the people, the shamans, we assume a lot of this is related to shaman activity, that their powers may have actually come from cacti, which is pretty unusual because you normally see the spirit helpers or the animals that help the shaman are always animals, and so cactus is pretty unique, if my interpretation is correct. Now, you can see that things are starting to fade a little bit, unfortunately, and that's just the nature of pictographs. But here's that white individual I mentioned earlier, and then there's another checkerboarded individual next to it. But let's go and look at the drawings that was done. And you can see these are really unusual figures here. It has eyes or a mask, probably more likely a mask, which is very uncommon. You can see most of the monos do not have any facial features whatsoever. No mouths, no eyes, no ears, or no nose. And so, but again, there are exceptions. And then this one, again, it has the lines like the cactus, but look at this checkerboard of the black and white ones. Unusual. Okay, and even some of the monos, when you start to look at them, they're different. This one, sorry, I'm having problems with my computer here. This one here, dang it, sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah. Okay. The one on the left, the figure on the left here, is actually seated. It's seated like it's on a ledge here, and then its feet are hanging over, and then there's a fish that is swimming underneath his legs.
Ah,
You
Cool.
see that? So again,
mhm.
you know, it's different. It's a mono. Their arms are raised up, which is very typical, or to the side. But he's seated, and then there's a fish that's going, and so you have an action scene here, and it's just different than some of the other things.
Mhm.
And when you look at it here, here's that individual. You can see the knees are bent, and then there's the fish underneath. But you look up and you can see they just go all the way up to the very top of the edge of the rock. These monos. Now, there are multiple black and white arrows or spears that that appear to pierce the anthropomorph. Although when you look at them carefully, you realize a lot of them are not actually piercing the individual, but are laid on top of it after the figure was made. And so what does that represent? It's not part of the process of creating the human, but there's an additional design element that is placed after the anthropomorph has been created. So does that really mean metaphorical death, or is it an actual death? And there's a big debate about whether this is enemies that have been killed and therefore they're commemorating that you've killed an enemy, or if it's metaphorical death in the other world. I prefer that interpretation versus the other one.
Mhm.
Okay, there's lots of other things going on in this cave, though. Rock shelter. There's one big boulder on one side that's just full of carved vulvas. These are female vaginas, and they're actually not uncommon in the Southwest and in California. But here's a whole slew of them that have been carved on top of red figures. So there's a relationship between the figures like this one here, and then the vulva that's carved on top of it, or not, I don't know. And then right outside the entryway, there are these boulders that have vulvas carved in them, and then notches all along the edge here. No idea what's going on here. Now, a lot of the rock art sites, even though we interpret them as ritual activity, they have domestic artifacts. And just to give you an idea of some of them in this particular site, here's lots of choppers, lots of marine shell. Again, they're bringing shell from the Sea of Cortez, probably. Lots of slab metates, and that's expected because, you know, these are hunter-gatherers, and so they're probably relying on grass foods, and so you need to grind your grass. And then I thought this was fascinating. I just finished a study in Central Arizona at the Verde Valley Archaeology Center, and there were a number of wood wands there. And so and that's Sinawa culture, not related to this, but Southwest. And I was intrigued to find this piece of carved rod here, and it's carved as a snake head. And I believe that this is also one of those wands that shamans use. Okay, so we left that side, and now I want to go just briefly to south of there, where you can see the sites. Oh, stupid thing here. Okay. The sites are totally different. Abstract. You don't see the monos, the big anthropomorphs, and you see a lot of really unusual geometric designs. It might be calendars. It could well be that there are calendars represented here. I mean, this is strange. the lines and dividing areas of, and this looks to me like a finger, by the way, that they dipped a finger in the paint and then they painted it with the finger. Same down here with the white ones here. This one is really unusual because of the green color. Green is not a common color, but here's where they've clearly created some kind of geometric design, fascinating design. Be curious to see what other people think this might represent. I have no idea. But
And what's the green color? How did they achieve that?
It's copper, probably, the copper mineral. Now, since you asked that question, I'll go into this real quickly. The red is hematite. It's an ochre, and the orange or yellow colors are also an ochre, iron oxides, and the white is probably gypsum, and the black is either charcoal or manganese, and all of these raw materials occur at a site in Baja at the famous Three Virgins volcanoes. And there are actually places where we've seen that they've tunneled for obsidian there, and also they're collecting the pigments that they then use for the rock art. So it was readily available in that one location. Okay, now let's go into the Sierra de San Francisco. This requires mule caravans. As you can see, it's extremely rugged, and but once you get down into the canyons, there are locations where there's water, and these water tanks are essentially what's left over from rainstorms that they had recently. But interestingly, we find that a lot of the big rock art sites are located where there is water, and that would make sense. In fact, I think that a lot of the rock art might have been actually painted in the fall, because that's when water would have been available in the water tanks. Now, in 1962, the world was shown and what the rock art of Baja is all about, at least from their perspective. All right, in 1962, writer Earl Stanley Gardner, who had been spending a lot of time in Baja anyway, because he lived in Southern California, because you may or may not know that Earl Stanley Gardner was the writer for Perry Mason shows. So he created that character and wrote a lot of the episodes. And so he was fairly well off from his work in Hollywood. And then he partnered with an archaeologist from the UCLA, Clement Megan, and they did an expedition by helicopter and then hiking into the rock art area, as you can see here. And then they wrote several articles and kind of set the baseline for understanding the rock art. So that was a very, very important study that they did. And then, of course, I talked about Harry Crosby, that he did this book. He was a journalist, and he spent several years writing mules. And the book, if you can get a hold of it on Amazon, I highly recommend it. It's a spectacular book. Not only the ideas that he has in it, but also the paintings and the illustrations are really informative. And here he is right here in front of this famous panel, which I'll get to later on. Okay, so this is how you get down there. Here's me on my mule, and the way it worked is you went with an outfit company, and they assigned a cowboy to you. And there's my cowboy behind me, I guess, to make sure I don't do anything stupid. And then all the materials that we were going to sleep in and eat and stuff all had to be carried in by the burros. So you ride the mules, and then the burros carry everything. And you can see our caravan here. To take 6 archaeologists to see the rock art required a caravan of about 24 animals. It was quite an ordeal. Okay, here's a San Gregorio, the trail going to the site that's right here. And here's one of the individuals that went up with us, and you can see in some cases it's so overpainted that you can't even recognize the figures anymore. But again, it's a fairly low ceiling, and here's, you can see often this is for the really big sites, it starts on the ceiling inside and then it pours out and then it goes up the side of the cliff.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, and look, here's a person here, and look at the
Jeez.
size of this
Oh,
bighorn sheep. You know, that's a huge, I mean, that animal is way bigger than the individuals here.
And how
Actually,
did they get up there to paint that? Oh my.
well, they had to use scaffolding. The
Mhm.
only way, because there are some paintings that are 30 feet above the floor of the cave. And the only way you could get up there would be scaffolding. And there's plenty of wood available, so
Mhm.
that's, you know, would not have been impossible.
Daredevil artists to get up on scaffolding like that.
Yeah, yeah. And then this is a sharp drop here, so you got to anchor it somehow.
Exactly.
And here's just a close up, but when you start to look at it, you see that over the painting, and there's so much going on. If you really look carefully, then you can start to see things. Here's one of the monos, the bicolor, black and white with the fingers and the hands upraised. And people have asked me, what do you interpret with the upraised arms? And my intuitive reaction to that is supplication. It's a position of expressing, you know, your acknowledgement that there's larger forces than you out there,
And
yeah.
you're welcoming them.
and you're welcoming
embracing
them, or you're acknowledging their presence. Would be how I would
Mhm.
say that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it gets so crazy that it's just oh, golly, that you just stare at it and go, okay.
Wow.
You can really see the overpainting here. Here's a very large quadruped here. And then there's smaller ones that they're similar, you know, bicolor, stomach is black and the rest of it is red. And here's a funny looking bird over here.
It almost looks like Aboriginal Australian type of design.
Well, it does. And in fact, I would say this is the closest I've ever seen of that was similar to the Australian paintings. Yeah, multicolors, large size figures, clearly myths involved. There's also here, I want to point out the rabbit, the nice little rabbit here. The most common element in the Great Murals are rabbits. You know, oddly enough, it gets the name the Great Murals, but the most common one are rabbits. And that's not unusual because the excavations that have been done out there have shown that the most common food was a rabbit. So that perhaps is, you know, tying into the idea that maybe this is some kind of hunting magic, you know, to increase your chance of success. Look at this bird here, totally different with the open mouth and the beak. And there's a whole series of birds over here. And I'll talk about birds again in a minute, but I just wanted to realize, imagine having to record this. How long would it take? A long time. And probably you'd want to take a series of photos and do your preliminary sketches back in the lab and then come out again and check your sketches. That's how I would approach it. Because it's very difficult to actually get everything that's going on here. Again, you can see just crazy. Here we have two different quadrupeds, and one is upright and one is not upright. And so I've been asked, well, what does it mean when they're not upright? And I said, well, in the literature, they talk about that represents death. You know, if it's not in a normal position, it's probably representing a creature in the other world. And of course, that would be where dead creatures go. But I don't know if you noticed here, but look at this big white snake.
Mm-hmm.
red outline, white. It's very unusual. There are very few snakes in the Great Mural tradition. Very few. So this is real unusual, the snake amongst all the quadrupeds here. But they did depict snakes. Okay, and here's again a couple of birds here, and then the birds on top of a quadruped that's standing. Okay. And then you got a smaller human figure here, and notice how the legs here are now going up over the outside.
Oh.
So you can't even see the figure as a whole, which I think is a statement. And look at this. This is another mono bicolor, only it's sideways. It's not straight up and down. The variability we get. And here's another one of the birds, and notice how it's bicolor. Half of it's black, half of it's red. So the similar process of doing bicolor in the humans or the anthropomorphs is also done for the mammals and for the birds. So they're all getting this bicolor treatment. Here's another site very nearby the last one, and what's unusual about this site is very large mountain sheep here, bighorn sheep here, and then this is a whale. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Again, another rabbit here. But what I'd like to point out is, you get fascinated. Let's go back. You get fascinated by the rock art, and then, but if you pull back and you just focus a little bit on that rock art, you realize that this whole stone is carved.
Really?
And it's got grooves in it, and there's something going on with the creation of rock sculptures at these sites, as well as the painting. And I've never seen anything in literature talking about these sculptured rocks, but they're there. I mean, I saw them and I photographed them, and this one almost looks like this is a head here of a creature. I don't know. But it's not. It's ground and it's smooth and it's clearly intentional. Okay, here's
almost
the
like
whale.
conduits for fluid to flow or something.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the whale I was talking about. Now, why would you depict a whale when you're in the middle of a desert? Well, because you saw one.
They had access to the ocean.
Keep in mind that these are hunter-gatherers who have seasonal movements, and part of the year they're going to go to the ocean. And so they'll see, ocean creatures, and they'll be a very distinct memory, I'm sure. And then they come back and they paint them. And it gives you an idea of the scale here. Here's one of our wranglers, by the way. He was 10 years old, and he did everything all the other cowboys did. It was, in fact, he was an expert lasso, and one of the burros went renegade, and he chased after that and lassoed that burro with the full gear on it. And so that was really interesting. But I want to point out that this whale is a little strange. Okay, it's got the head like a whale, it's got the fins, it's got the big body, but it's got legs. It's got human legs.
Oh, wow.
And then there's something going on internally in this part of the lower part of the body here. You can see it's almost like a spirals or something. But to me, when I see something like this, I say that's not a whale. That's a shaman who is transforming into a whale.
Right.
That's why you got half of a whale here and then half of legs for an anthropomorph.
Those hybrid figures get very interesting, don't they?
Yeah, they do, and it suggests again this whole notion of the transformation of the shamans and their spirit helpers.
A metamorphosis.
Yeah, metamorphosis, exactly. And then you can see, actually, when you look carefully, that the legs are on top of a human too. So they then painted it over an existing human. And then here's another mono here with a bicolor, and he's actually touching the leg of this big whale creature. So, when you read literature, they'll say, "Oh, there's no real narratives," and in other words, multiple figures that are representing some kind of action scene. I say differently. I think there is some narratives going on there.
Oh, indeed.
Here's a close-up of that person that's touching the leg of that whale. And, they say there's no faces, but I look at this and I say, that almost looks like there's a face in that picture. Look at the white outline for the head there. I always talked about there's always an outline and then the infill.
Pays to have the spirit journeys to understand what these cultures were seeing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, it does. Yeah, it definitely does. Okay, now there's a cave site that we visited right next to one of the rock art sites, and it's a rock shelter, and it was a habitation site. There's no rock art inside this alcove, but there's all these artifacts and these obsidian. Look at different kinds of obsidian points. This one is an archaic point. It's called a La Paz or gypsum cave style, and it would have been thrown with an atlatl. Now, keep in mind that the archaic peoples did not have bow and arrow. That came in later. The bow and arrow in the Southwest probably didn't come until about 8200 or 8400. And so you're talking about a weapon system, the atlatls, a throwing stick that preceded the bow and arrow. And so we find a lot of the large dart points, as we call them, related to the atlatl throwing system. And then a lot of shell, and the shell is worked, and clearly they used the shell as tools, and then also as containers. And so it's not just bringing the shell food into the canyons, it's actually bringing the shells and then using them as tools. And right across the canyon there is just the El Borrego site. And as you can see, I love this one particular panel here. You have a quadruped, and you have a human that's standing on the back of the quadruped with the upraised arms to a whale. So you got, mammal, human, and sea creature all in one scene here.
Mm.
And then, so what I would ask is, okay, why is the whale on top and not on the bottom? When do you normally think the whale that lives in the water under would be in the bottom? No, it's up here. And so to me, this is intentional, designs power.
Right.
It's power. And the most powerful creature of the three here is the whale. And that's why it's, and then also at an angle, that's not how they swim, although I guess if they breach, it would be like that. But so lots of questions. And then here's at that same site, a whole series of monos in a row, all of them with their hands up in the air, so typical. And then here's a big fish over here. It's not a whale, but it's next to this mono here. And then up here are some even bigger monos. So it's one of the rules of the rock art appears to be that the larger the figure, the higher up it goes on the wall.
Interesting.
Which may be again, representing power.
Mm-hmm. Almost like an extension of a spirit experience, something that goes beyond the
Yes.
ordinary reality to something broader that they're
Yes.
bringing forth. Yeah.
I agree completely. Again, when you look at these closely, here's those figures I showed in a row. They're actually on top of a bighorn sheep. In fact, this guy here is actually holding the horns of the bighorn sheep. And it's been suggested that it's common that the humans are on top of the large mammals, and that may represent power over or control over the large animals by putting them over them rather than behind them. Look, this is funny. You've got one black leg and one red leg, and then you can even see the dew claws on the bighorn sheep there. Okay, we looked at that. All right, here's again more of those monos with the upraised arms, and then two whales above them, or large fish. And this one, and I don't know, it's hard to say if those are feet or the fins. And then here's the scene. There's the cowboys resting over there while we're exploring the rock art here. And here's this panel right here I want to show you. It's pretty interesting. Okay, well, we'll get back to that in a second. I want to go, there's 3 major panels, one here, and then one over here. And let's, it's again, another one of those obsidian archaic points.
Mhm.
And then also, the datura plant, Jimson weed. This is a highly hallucinogenic plant, and many of us believe that this was the preferred hallucinogenic inducer. In other words, you eat the part of all of the plant is poisonous, or but if you you can get a really intense trance state by eating these plants, and they're all over wherever there's rock art. So I think it's related to the consumption of it as part of the rock art rituals.
Mhm.
Okay, again, it shows you with the overpainting, it's just really hard to see what's going on, but you do see there's a beautiful black bighorn sheep. Notice the horns, how big they are here. Magnificent. And then here's something different that I was intrigued by. There's a human here, mono, with a sock hat. They call it sock hat. Has various kinds of hairdos. This might just be hair done in a certain style. But this human is on top of a whale, over a whale. Remember that all the other ones are always separate from the whales. And then here is a sea turtle.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Big sea turtle, probably a green sea turtle. And so here, and then what his hand is touching the fin of that. So you clearly have an individual, a shaman, I would propose, that is showing you the spirit helpers, a whale and a sea turtle.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now here's what's called the family, and it's a whole series of them. It's called monos, and it's called a family, I assume, because there's a child here with them. And then a big mammal above them. And then actually there's a black one right here underneath this one. But if you look carefully here, you can see this is clearly a child. And here's the female right next to it. You can see the breast splay out on the sides. And there was another one. Okay, now we go to another site. And here's 2 sea turtles.
Yeah.
See the sea turtles, one here and then one here.
It's almost as though they're swimming over your head. Yeah.
Now these are actually rays. These are manta rays here, 2, one above the other. And so again, it's interesting to see these sea creatures being depicted very dramatically deep into the mountains in the desert. So I was real intrigued by the fact that there were 2 in a row here. This one almost looks like it's biting the tail of the other one. But clearly this one's faded, but this one you can see it matches the manta ray, what's been interpreted as a manta ray at a famous petroglyph site in the area. And at that site, they identified 3 different kinds of rays, but this is the most common that we see painted in the mountains. But I just happened to find this painting, photograph, because this intrigued me. Why back to back like that? Why not side to side? Well, apparently when these manta rays jump out of water, they create a ghost figure of water.
Oh, wow.
See that? See
Wow.
this ghost figure of water here?
Obvious.
So it
Yeah.
gives the impression of 2 of them, the one and then the spirit of the one. I don't know how you'd interpret this, but that is just really dramatic.
Oh, my.
You know, anybody that saw that would never forget that image.
And the powers of observation and detail.
Mm.
That
The documented.
Incredible photograph. Richard Jackson, he's really a great photographer.
Beautiful.
But yeah, when you look at the, the two here, I
Mm.
mean, it just almost matches beautifully. This one here is,
Yeah.
so again, if the rock art is really about the spirit world, these are the kind of experiences that you would have that you would say, wow, that's the spirit world manifesting itself in front of me.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Symbology worth noting.
Okay, so let's now go into another canyon. And here's shows you the places that you can visit. I went to 1, 2, 3, 4 of them here of this canyon. And this is the Cueva del Raton. And it's starting to fade, unfortunately, and it's right off the side of a road, so it's easily visited. But it was called Raton because somebody thought this was a mouse when they first recorded it, but later on they realized, no, it's a mountain lion. It's a black mountain lion. And there are actually several mountain lion images in the rock art of the Baja area. Interesting, here's a mono bicolor, but look, it's different because it's solid red on one side and then striped black on the other side, and then has a black face. Very unusual. There's a few of these. So again, there's enough variations that you're wondering why, where'd that black face come from? The other ones don't have black faces. Okay, another site is called La Musica, and it's the most unusual site I've ever seen in my life. And I've seen a lot of rock art, and I just don't know what to think of it. But you can see it's just a small panel that's in the ceiling of a crack in the cliff here, and this is the drawing that they have on a sign there.
Yes.
And it's all these lines here, the grids, and the individuals that don't look anything like the monos that we've seen, I've been showing you, and they all have one raised hand. And believe it or not, but the Aina, here's the actual panel photograph. I want to point out they made a mistake here. When they printed the sign, they reversed it.
Oh.
So say, for example,
they're all going.
this guy right here with the arm up.
Yeah.
Here it is here. So they reversed the image accidentally and didn't realize that when they printed it, it's a backwards image. And
So
I wonder if they even recognized that, if anybody's pointed that out to them.
So you're playing the music backwards.
It does look like notes on a musical grid.
It does, yeah. They say that this is a musical scale and that these hand postures are the notes. Now, okay, if this is true, I've never heard of this kind of interpretation at any site I've been to before. I find it very intriguing, but that's a pretty sophisticated knowledge of music, isn't it? To be able to scale it out and have notes represented by hand gestures. We normally conceptualize archaic hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
But why not? I mean, there's no reason that they didn't have sophisticated knowledge of music. But anyway, that's a very interesting one.
Absolutely.
Because you would have pitch, you could represent pitch, and you could have a common grid, and you would, it's logical. It's not that hard to come up with that pattern.
And it brings to question, has anyone tried to add notes to that?
Well, yeah, that's a good question too. Yeah, I know, especially since it's Aina put the sign there. Somebody must have tried some experiments with it.
Giving new meaning to rock music.
Move on to another site here, Cueva Las Flechas, and that's because of the arrows. But it's a really well depicted scene here. And what I find interesting about it is, for example, here's 4 monos, 4 anthropomorphs, and they all have different head styles. This one has got little floppy ears and then a straight stick. This one has a half of a red head and with a black cap, apparently. And then this one has a big head with 3 sticks coming out. Maybe these represent feathers. that they're wearing, part of a headdress. But what I want to point out is you have these big figures, and then underneath you have all these small figures. And, you know, again, the representation of small and then big is power. You know, to me, I look at that and I go, that's power. That's a statement of power there. And here's an interesting deer, well depicted, in motion. Now, most of the animals are all in profile and look like they're running, because the legs generally show motion, which is kind of interesting, where most of the monos, the humans, are not look like they're in motion. They're more or less static. The animals on the same panel will be. But I wanted to point out that this deer has a big bird on it, painted over it. See the bird here, the feathers, the head, the beak is open. And here's another big horned sheep, and again with a mono or the human on top of it, much smaller than it is. And then here's in the same panel, there's actually 7 monos here, all with different kinds of headdresses. There's 3, and then there's 4 in here. And then this one just looks bizarre here to me. Look at, there's the hand that doesn't look like fingers. It looks more like claws on this one here, with a strange headdress too, different than the other ones. Like there's the floppy ears with the feather maybe. And notice the bodies of these two are also, you know, they're not bicolor. So again, the variation is there if you just look at it well enough. Okay, this is the really famous site, La Pintada, and you can see it's in a beautiful canyon, just a spectacular area. Here's the alcove or rock shelter that has got rock art all the way on it, and then you can see water down there, the water tanks. So there's a good place for water, and the INA has actually built a walkway on this because it is so famous and they want to protect it. But it gives you an idea just how dense the rock art is along the ceiling here. You have to lie on your back to see it. So,
Yeah. Well, and that comes the question, of course, to create it, you're lying on your back, possibly, depending on whether it was scaffolding or whether there's been some shifting, or what do you think?
I think scaffolding. You put scaffolding up and you lie on your back and paint it on your scaffolding. Yes.
Wow.
A little Sistine Chapel action there.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Oh, okay, let's get carried away here. All right, so just to give you an idea of the rock art on this side, it's really spectacular.
Wow.
There's so many figures here, you can't even count them. And in fact, and look, okay, here's the head of this figure, the mono, and look, goes down here, and then the legs go all the way down here. I mean, those are huge legs. And of this bird, look at the birds.
All looks like they're sitting down, right? Because they're
Well, they
legs.
got their legs spread, but they could be, yes, they could be sitting down because their legs look like their toes are open, you know, like they're grasping something.
That's a
Yeah.
common feature, to use the natural formation of the rock to
Yeah, right. We see that even
position
in
the
Europe
figures.
and other
Yeah.
places. And the birds, are they condors? What do you think the birds represent?
Turkey vultures.
Oh, turkey vultures.
Turkey vultures, yeah. So turkey vultures are very common there still today. And it's
Mhm. Egypt was fond of turkey vultures as well.
Mhm.
but here again, it's
Tony's asking if any headdresses survived and were found in any of the caves.
no headdresses. They do find lots of preserved material, lots of cordage and pieces of baskets and stuff, but no headdresses that I'm aware of. This is a really dramatic scene. Excuse me. But you have this deer, obviously in an action pose, but it's got infill part of it in black, and then the whole body is in yellow.
Hmm.
One I've seen like that. And then of course here's a mono or a human or anthropomorph that's touching the belly of the deer. And then here are two more of those turkey vultures. It's just so
Did
much
they
in each.
mix anything with the pigments to make it last so many thousands of years?
Well, that's a good question, because you have to have a binder of some kind. We know the minerals that they're being used, but we don't know the binders. But in my last trip, I met a local, and he knew plants, and he told me that there was a plant that was really sticky. It was good as Gorilla Glue,
Oh, wow.
just by getting the resin from the plant. So I'm thinking, boy, that would make a good binder. Something that's actually a glue-like product.
And it grew right there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's right there. Yeah. I want to point out that these birds have white in between the black. So they have white feathers and black feathers.
Hmm.
And then notice this one. He appears to have a red line in its mouth, perhaps a snake or a worm. Okay, now we get really dramatic here. This scene is so full of action that it's hard to figure out. But you have all these figures that are upright, typically straight upright, and then all of a sudden you have this section here where it looks like they're being pushed. All these monos here are leaning.
Mhm.
Ah, I see.
And even this one is leaning this way a little bit. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 humans there. And then they've scratched some kind of designs over them, and they almost look like shields or some kind of, I don't know, but and notice how the motion of that matches the motion of the bodies.
Mhm.
So it's really something different.
Some kind of extension of the spirit experience of some sort. Yeah.
Yes. And when you see then, it gives you an idea. I'm lying on my stomach. That's why everything looks so out of whack here. And I started thinking about it when I was lying on my stomach, trying to photograph this, that by doing that, you're changing your sense of perspective too. So it's not just the rock art, but it's the context of the rock art is creating you to sort of twist your world around so that
Yes.
things are normal.
Change your perspective.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. So here's oh boy.
So the placement and the orientation from where you can
View it.
have the view is specific to allowing for that experience.
Requires you.
Requires you to,
Yeah.
open that doorway to the specific experience that
Exactly.
they wanted to share.
Again, remember when I talked about the word context, this would be a good example of that, where your context here is not just the figures and the scenes that they're creating, but also what happens to you as a viewer when you're doing that. Your whole world is disoriented.
Wow. Yeah.
That disorientation, I think, plays a role in understanding the rock art as well.
Well,
Profound.
you
That's
see the
profound.
window, though, that narrow window of the sky. There's a lot of modern artists that are going to great lengths to create that, either in a museum setting or reforming a mountain. And I mean, that is the thing that a lot of modern artists try to do,
Yeah.
right? Give you a window and force your perspective. So
Mm.
it's interesting. They're doing it back then.
Yeah, well, again, it's like you said in the beginning of my introduction, these notions of the spiritual quest and visiting the other world and communicating with ancestors is so ancient and so widespread worldwide
Mhm.
that to me, it's almost a universal process.
Yes.
I
Yes.
want to point out one thing here. Remember, I said that there are no faces, or very few faces on these anthropomorphs. Come on. What did I do here? Okay. This is that one person that's leaning against all these that are tilted. You know, you can really see here the scratched rectangles that they put. He's looking this way, and there's a whole another scene down here. How do I know he's looking this way? Because his eye is there. See the eye? This guy has a face, and the one eye is very prominent, and he's looking right down here at this scene here. And then also I'd like to point out that here's a fish. See the big fish that's there?
Mhm.
So, I mean, you can't, I mean, how do you have a fish and large and small, bighorn sheep and humans? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense in the real world.
Or maybe it's showing how you dance as a community and you start swaying or something, who knows?
Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's possible.
open to interpretations.
But the point that I would make is that it's intentional. This isn't just somebody going out there and just willy-nilly, you know, like graffiti and doing whatever they feel like doing.
Right, it's
Part
purposeful.
of a communication system that people can recognize it and interpret it, even if you didn't do it. Here's an interesting depiction of I don't know, I'll call it a quadruped, but look at these. I mean, those can't be horns, they're just two straight long horns there. And then here's a human. He looks like he's doing an acrobatic move with this creature here. See the arm and the neck?
Oh, yeah.
The hand is grabbing the neck, and then the hand is grabbing the chest, and then
It's like a dinosaur.
swinging, yeah, around the body there.
Or the bowling thing of the Cretans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then oddly enough, here's one of the birds, but it's sideways. You know, they're always like they're in flight upway, but this one is sideways. So there's just a lot of weird things going on here. But I wanted to point that out of this body, this strange body, there's a white arrow coming out, and it goes into this bird. And the bird has originally was all black, and then they redesigned the bird to make it white on top of the black. So this is two different depictions of the bird. First the black, and then the white, and then with the white arrow going into the white. And
Almost like
here's-
a bolt of energy to transform it. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Well, some archaeologists have suggested that the repainting of the same figure is to renew your identity with that figure in some capacity.
Right, reactivate it.
Yes, reactivated. That's a good word. Here's another one of those. This is a big rabbit here. Okay, let's go back. Nice rabbit there. Okay, and then here we have more of these mono scenes with the big deer that's behind this one mono, and here this funny headdress with and then big fingers on this guy here.
Yeah.
This is really considered one of the premier panels in all of Baja, because it's so well done. I mean, everything is you know, well defined. The lines are.
And did the formation just seem to protect it more so than some of the other sites? So less erosion, less wind?
It
Or?
doesn't. That's the odd thing. It's the kind of it's a flat cliff that's kind of exposed. So yeah, it's odd how some preserve better than others. Look at this guy here. Again, the bicolor mono with a hat, and then he's got some kind of headdress, weird headdress. See all the things sticking out of there. And it's these depictions of the heads that some archaeologists had suggest represent lineages.
Oh,
But I'd like to see the data. It's just a anecdotal comment, and I'd like to see
sure.
a little more data on that before I buy into that.
And
Here's
also just the
again-
images above the head also, Tanique, could represent that of documenting the journey, the experience, something, maybe it's not a headdress, maybe it's something more, but yeah, like you
Something
say,
to represent the experience.
something,
had.
yeah. Could be.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, say for example, uh, you're trying to depict some cognitive
Exactly.
uh, event or some cognitive process that you're going through at the time, you might do something with your head to depict that something is happening with your head.
Energetically, experientially,
Yes, exactly.
visually.
Yes.
And Tony, the answer is yes to your question about postures.
Yeah.
The
Indeed.
postures, what was the question?
Oh, the strong postures, has Cuyamonga Institute sampled any of these? Many of these are in our canon, but that's another story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the postures are really important component of interpretation because,
Yes.
you know, I've already asked the question, why is something sideways and upside down?
Mhm.
And usually as a not, you know, normal. So you see all these people all upright, like they could be people you know that are just standing there and getting their portrait taken. But then
But
when
you're not
they're
going to do this necessarily. for a
sideways or upside
portrait.
down,
That's
they're not.
purposeful. That's, yeah.
Yeah, this is
Exactly.
very purposeful. This is codified communication system here. I agree
Yeah.
with that. I mean, look at all these people.
Ritual instructions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or it's creating a mood too. It doesn't have to be an instruction so much as it is. When you see that, you know that's a sign of reverence.
Or a
Mhm.
ceremonial gesture.
Yeah.
Or, well, yeah.
Part of a
ceremony
ritual.
gesture. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Good.
And there has to be something when you get a group of people together, because these are groups and you're all standing in the same posture
The family.
in a
the
ritual.
family of
That's
images
that's
together-
powerful.
Together, yeah.
It's powerful.
Again, you know, you have all these humans or anthropomorphs down here, and then you have the big sheep and deer higher up on that. And I mean, God, look at these depictions. These, to me, I've been to several Ice Age cave in France,
Oh, we have too. Yeah.
and some of these animals remind me of the French Ice Age cave rock art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
really well depicted. Look at that line work. I mean, that is just beautiful line work, and the, you know, the expression of the mouth and the ears and the antler. I mean, these are artists. These are people that are skilled at depicting, you know, what they see or experienced. It's just not somebody going, oh, I'm going to go put something up there now because I had a weird dream.
And the nuances of the animals and the phase of life they're in and the seasons and
All of that.
lots of detail. Yeah.
Well, and every time you look at it, there's something different. I mean, again, here's a deer, and they've got the, you know, outline like they do everything else, but then you've got part of the body's red here, and then you got part of it striped black, and
Yeah.
then part of it's solid black.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
we didn't see any deer that had this kinds of infill. And then, or this one, look at this one, is just all horizontal lines as the infill.
Mhm.
Okay, so they're
Is that a
depicting.
language? Is that meaningful?
Mhm.
Another
Well,
kind of
that's the question I'm asking. Is this meaningful? Is it arbitrary or is this intentional? I think
the
it's
more,
intentional.
yeah, the more you look at this stuff, you just, nothing's arbitrary. There seems to be so much intention behind it.
Yes.
It
And look at
boggles the
the
mind.
details of the dew claws here. Again, you know, they know these animals well. They've observed them well enough.
Well, and also maybe these are marks of mythic characters,
Mhm.
and the mythic characters are off having adventures.
Could be. Yeah.
Like, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why would you depict this big horn sheep here and then this little rabbit underneath it?
There's a story.
There's probably a story there. Yeah, maybe this.
Mhm.
And then look, there's a female behind. It's behind. Okay, this is interesting. This is a female. You can see because of the breasts. She is behind this bighorn sheep,
Yeah.
which is really unusual. Remember, I kept telling everything's in front because that's representing power. So here's an exception, you know, and that's the odd thing is there's all these exceptions to everything that we see. This one is,
Let's see.
you can see it's the white outline for the deer and then the red interior. And this is a funny looking hat here, huh?
Mhm.
What's that?
Hmm.
Oh, I got a headache. Oh. And then this, what is this? Look at this little thing here. Almost looks like a jellyfish.
In a bubble. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I love the toes, the toes are not 5 though, it's usually just 4, although sometimes 5.
Christine Van Poel loves the concept of cactus people, and she was wondering, are there any animals also referred to as cactus people, or is that represented by the original?
I'm the one that came up with that term, cactus people.
Oh, it's a great term.
Yeah, I think so,
I think
because
so. Yeah.
I took a lot of photographs of the cactuses out there, and as I was doing that, I was thinking, this could actually be what some of those scarecrows were. Here's the crew. I was just thanking all the people that helped me there. And
You
so,
had a good crew, and you said the burros, the mules really know what they're doing.
oh,
Trust the mule when you're going over a
mules are
vertical cliff.
amazing. As I said, my first time, I actually was raised on a ranch, and so I rode horses a lot as a child. So I wasn't, I knew how to ride, and I wasn't afraid of. But I'd never ridden a mule, and I'd never ridden an animal that was going on trails that humans would barely walk on.
Yeah. Wow.
As I said, I may have mentioned this to you. I died 1,000 deaths in my mind on that first trip.
Mm.
Because the mules, the way they are, is the trails is a lot of zigzag, 90-degree angles, and the mule will go right to the end of where the trail is turning, and he looks like he's just going to keep going off the cliff, but he makes a sharp turn, and they just intuitively know where to put their feet. It's a
They're
remarkable.
so sure-footed, and
I-
they've got a good sense of balance. I mean, they're carrying a lot of weight on their back with all the equipment and a person, and so
Well, the
they're
the mules are only carrying the people, but I'm 200 pounds, so that's 200 pounds. The burros are carrying, I think, about 150 pounds each.
of equipment.
So you separate them. Only the burros carry the goods, and then the mules
Mhm.
carry the
More
hand.
precious cargo, the humans. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
5 days, 5 days on a mule.
Wow.
That's a commitment.
Yeah, and that's twice, 2 times.
Well,
This was a stunning slideshow.
Todd,
Thank you.
we
What an
had the
experience.
privilege of meeting you in person and seeing an original presentation. But yeah, this is just an amazing, stunning inspiration to try to put some kind of language to this experience, because I think, like you said, if you go to a dinner party and mention that you're an archaeologist, everybody wants to crowd around and ask questions. We're
Mhm.
all full of questions when it comes to this.
So have you have a little extra time and put your hand up, right?
Yeah, I know Tony's going to want to ask a question, and Tony is a colleague of yours. So
Right.
let me put Tony on, and he can
Okay.
start us off with some questions.
Okay.
Hello, Tony.
Hi, Todd. Amazing, absolutely amazing, and I think only you could present this and have the insights that you did. It's
Okay.
I would love to see you come back and answer some of the questions that you just touched on. For example, is there any dating of this?
Yes, there is. The dating is hard to interpret though, because it's
Sure.
different location stuff, but I tried to do as much as I could on that. The oldest date is 7,500 years old.
Wow.
It's very
And,
old.
Wow.
and is that by AMS on the rock art, or is it by?
Yes. No,
Okay.
these are actually C14 dates from the pigment. Yeah.
Oh.
And they've taken more. That was in the not the first, but the second site I showed you with all the monos there, that they did the beautiful paintings in 1950, 51, when Ina came in, that woman, Barbara, did it.
Yes.
That's the oldest known site. And that's the 7,500-year-old.
You said there were also sites at 5,000 and 3,000 years. So this was an
Yes.
enduring culture.
Yeah,
This is
and
the
we have-
culture that lasted many thousands of years.
Well, we have radiocarbon dates that go 5,000 years on the Great Murals.
Wow.
And it could be, there's some debate though that it might go up into the early historic period. So the dating is a little bit tricky, but there are a lot of dates now,
Mhm.
and it's very clear that it's archaic. This matches the material culture that we find there. The projectile points are all archaic. So
What did
yeah,
they name this
Right.
culture?
and
What-
another thing too is there's no pottery found at any site.
No pottery.
No pottery in those over 1,000 sites. No pottery. I never saw any pottery, and I was looking at every site. I think I've been about 16 sites now down there, and
Mhm.
which tells you they're hunter gatherers.
Yeah.
Out of
With good
curiosity,
cordage.
why would they?
And cordage, yeah.
Yeah, why would they come from the abundant ocean to go up into the dry mountains? What was the
And
thought?
what at 5,000 feet? So from sea level to 5,000 feet, that's quite a range of topography.
Uh, well, because the mammals are going to be in the mountains.
Oh, the mammal hunting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I
the
would-
deer and the bighorn sheep and rabbits and all that, they're going to be in the
And some
mountains.
good art, some good canvas to put your art, those rock cliffs. Yeah.
When you on the west side of the mountains, towards the Pacific, it's really dry desert.
Yeah.
And so I don't imagine there were too many, mammals there. So you have to go into the mountains, and that's where all the mammals are. So
Is there any sense of migration of the art, either from some other area or to some other area?
Good question.
that's a really good question, Tony. I should expect a good question like that from you.
Sorry about that.
No, it's a good question. I'm serious, because I've thought about that. Where did these people come from? Because the Kochimi are human-like or similar to human language. It's not the human language, but it's similar. And it looks like all of the people that we can identify archaeologically through Baja are more or less human speakers. And curious thing about human speakers is they're frightened by the dead. They and so the notion that these figures represent dead people, if they were humans, they would not be doing that, because the fear of the dead is so strong among the human cultures that they have a variety of different burial procedures and processes that they go through, and they would never be commemorating somebody by painting them on a wall. So that's the one trick, is to say, okay, but then if the Kochimi say that wasn't us, that would make sense that it was pre-human, before the humans moved down from California into the Baja, which means, unfortunately, we don't have any ethnographic data, and probably never will have ethnographic data on the rock art. It's always going to be prehistoric, before the Spanish came, and the Spanish were here in 1600s, and they recognized the rock art right away. But
Are there burials? And if there are burials, is there a DNA trail?
I don't think that there's been enough burials to have DNA. That's another good question. But and besides with DNA, you'd have to take samples from living populations, which they're unlikely to do these days.
Right.
They've had so many bad experiences with medical procedures that were not authorized on the name of research.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, we do have other archaic rock art throughout the Western US, and there's some similarities, just not the size and the color. That's what makes it so unique.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Why in that location did they make it so colorful and so big?
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean,
Had a
just,
lot to say, obviously.
yeah.
The
I
one
mean,
thing I was wondering about, that there is almost always superimposition in virtually everything I saw.
Yes.
And the superimposition, was it contemporary, or would it have been done a year later or a century later, or do we have any sense of that?
No, but I'll say this, I don't think it's a different culture that did the superpositioning. I think it's the same culture. And that's just from my own experience, that you don't mess around with somebody else's power.
mhm.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if you come in, you're different people and you didn't make it and you don't even know what it means, and then you start messing with it, that's just gonna
Bad
bring
juju. Yeah.
bad luck on you and your family and your community. So
But in the case of
Although,
all the
I-
vulvas, in the case of all the vulvas, could you imagine maybe it's a female power site, a ritual site, and maybe a puberty ceremony, so that annually or every so many years you come and another vulva is carved over these red figures, which might be the mother goddesses, who knows? And then the dots, you said these were fingerprints. So maybe you can imagine young girls making their mark. You know, I'm going to sacralize the mountain or the rock cliff and add my mark to it. I mean, you can imagine different ceremonies that would leave that kind of mark with women's business on a regular basis, could you not?
oh, yes,
Imagine it.
indeed, I
Yeah.
do. On the other hand, I don't want to use the word believe, but I question in my own mind the notion that this was too large of a group activity. I think there were small groups.
Yeah, but I
Uh,
mean, over time, there would be accumulation of a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
those
I
symbols.
mean, you
and a lot
got
of those
5,000,
fingerprints.
years of repainting on one side,
few
or
girls at a
2,000 or
time, you
whatever
get a
it
look.
is.
Sure.
Yeah, you're gonna, yeah. And you probably are being taken there. I think too, one thing we might want to consider for the overpainting, and we'll get back to your last question, Tony, but is the, they may be done by an apprentice and their shaman teacher.
I see.
So in other words, a shaman could go out to a power site
Mhm.
that he's known for his whole life, or she. We know that female shamans were present too,
Thank you.
Sure.
and take the apprentice there and then give them knowledge and then have them paint over a figure or something. So it could be part of a process of continuing the tradition through
Mhm.
actual on-the-site training by the teacher.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this Australian Aboriginals. There's a beautiful photograph that we saw of a Aboriginal. So it's when they could be photographed painting over a symbol right next door, painting over. So to reactivate it.
Oh,
So
that could be that too.
that's done widely.
And they had a picture of them doing that, so they had that
Mhm.
record.
Yep. So contemporary times doing that. Yep.
Yeah.
Continuing the tradition.
This brings up images of oceanic migration
Ah,
from Australia to Baja.
Yeah.
Comes
Yeah.
on TV.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I went back to Baja. I just came back from Baja again. This time I went whale watching.
Mm. You said you can
And,
take small boats out and see the whales
Yeah.
there.
The Mexico, as far as I know, is the only place in the Americas that you can actually touch a whale.
Mm.
And so, seriously, the gray whales that migrate from the Arctic down to Baja to give birth, hang out for 3 months down there, and they're very docile and friendly. And when you go out in a little Mexican boat,
Yeah.
and I mean, it's little, it's, maybe it holds 10 people on it, with no sides, and you go in these little fishing boats and you take the motor off, and the whales will come right up to you, and they will stick their heads up and they will allow you to touch them and rub their head. I'm not
Oh my
kidding.
gosh.
And I've got all these photos. I could show you these photos I've got. It's unbelievable experience. And I thought, a native person in a canoe could go out here and done the very same thing, experience these whales, and can be assured that that's going to be depicted in rock art for the rest of their lives, if they're doing rock art. So I know, as far as the whale experience goes, that you could actually physically get very close to
Mhm. And boy, you're going to have an experience there, aren't
Yeah.
you? Communion.
and not only that, but the whales, the gray whales have all these barnacles on them.
Mhm.
And so they like to get under your boat and rub the barnacles off.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're in this little boat,
They're
and
rocking
all
you.
of a sudden the boat is moving sideways, and
Wow.
you realize it's because the whale is under the boat and
Yeah.
it's rubbing its back to get the barnacles off.
Yeah.
And then that's when
Yeah.
you think, I hope this boat is seaworthy. But it was. We had a great time. So
That's
I
what
want to
it-
bring that up because, They could have actually had these kinds of experiences.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a special bond that you would have with
Yes.
the whale people and your
Especially if you
people.
touched one and you petted it.
Covenant.
Last question, Tony. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question, Todd. I kept on wondering about this. Looking at the rock panels that they painted on, did they paint on everything? Was there any? It did not look like they were particularly good canvases. Uh, and I'm
No, they
wondering the selection process of how do you go to the rock and what do you look for in the rock to do these magnificent, huge paintings?
Water,
Water.
yeah.
So water coming out of the rock or out of the cliffside or?
The water tanks that fill up,
Oh,
and then any springs that might be there. So wherever there's water, you're going to find rock art.
okay.
But that's a question that got asked by a lot of people. Why are they picking surfaces that are really not very good and
Yes.
leaving surfaces that are perfect and not using them? So clearly there's something about that place
Mhm.
It's
that's
important.
beyond the surface of the rock.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's what we're talking about power. I think it's a power place that recognizes a power place. And it doesn't matter if it's rough, there's power there and they want to be participating in sharing their experiences with that power.
Well, also you
When I
want
was, when I
water
was
so
in
you can
California,
stay there a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
when I was in California, I used to go to Ken Hedges' annual rock art conference.
Mhm.
And every year there would be a progressive paper on the acoustics of rock art
Mm.
and the selection of rock art location where there were echoes, where there were a response from the rocks. I wonder if there's any sense of that happening
Wow.
there.
There is, yeah, because I did some echo tests and, that's not the scientific way that they use with all their equipment stuff when they do those tests, but there's a lot of echoes in those canyons because they're narrow and they're
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah.
so you're going to get good echoes. So that could be a factor.
Yeah.
I think that's an understudied component of rock art, actually, is
Mhm.
acoustic.
I do
And
too.
I have a question for Paul and Laura now.
Okay.
What you mentioned that you have used some of these figures, the
Mhm.
postures
Yeah.
at Kanemunge. Is there
Yeah.
any kind of correlation of experience that you would
Oh, yes.
anthropomorph that
Oh,
you
yes.
would associate with where you get a certain resonance around a certain experience?
Yeah.
Yeah. We've done this. We've done this. We've done this. We've done, lots of
As part of that
different
research, of course, like we saw today, and then
Mhm.
there's the W
And this.
position, and we see
Yeah.
that worldwide and it's over and over
This.
again. And so we've
Yeah.
experimented with that as well. And yeah, we'll find a tremendous
Lots
amount of
of
correlation.
energy, a sense of expansion, hurtling out into the cosmos, deep into Mother
Embracing.
Earth, lots of kundalini up the spine, just lots of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. So this is an ongoing part of the work of Dr. Goodman
Yeah.
that we're still trying to
And, writing
forward
in the
with.
back of spirit animals, power animals. Yeah.
all of that. Yeah.
So
So that,
all
that
without
Let me,
drugs.
let
I
me
want to say.
respond to that
Yeah.
question. It's a good question. Oh, maybe I won't go there. Okay.
well, you're
Oh,
welcome.
go ahead.
Todd, I
We're
want to
amongst
hear.
friends.
Inquisitive minds want to know.
Yeah. Well, all right. Let me see if I can work my way into it.
Okay.
Let me ask you this question. Okay, if somebody comes up to you and they're gonna burglarize you or they're gonna mug you,
Yeah.
what do they do? Put your hands up.
Yeah.
What do? You do this.
Yeah.
It's universal.
Right.
Any language, you know what that means. Put your hands up.
Yeah.
And so what is the purpose of that gesture when you're putting your hands up?
I surrender.
It's submission.
Yeah.
You're submitting to a larger power than you because they have a
Mhm.
weapon and you don't.
Mhm.
Or
You're welcoming it. You're embracing it. You're
And
inviting it.
surrendering, as he said. Yeah.
Surrendering. Yeah.
yeah. And so
I love
that's how
that.
I see it. This putting the hands up is expressing that there's a greater power than you. You're acknowledging that and you're in its presence.
Yeah.
Well, also, it's interesting how your hands can activate and they just become energy centers, transmitting and receiving quite often, or energies just building up and then exploding out of your head. So lines like that, you just feel energy lines,
Oh, yeah.
powerful. You're just buzzing with energy.
And you see a lot of images, petroglyphs with the hands like this, and then a bunch of spikes coming out of the head.
Exactly.
So like,
Yeah,
saying,
like you
yeah,
become a
Well,
transmitter receiver
Yeah.
of cosmic energy.
Yeah.
You
Well,
become a
well-
liaison between Earth and the heavens.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Tony,
it's
so,
very
there's,
true.
so there's a commonality to
That-
world rock art, but
Yeah.
is there anything that's really specific and peculiar in Baja that, and only in Baja that we've tried?
Oh, no, we haven't
No.
done specific to Baja.
No, but we see these
Because it's
around the world, these same images.
Chaco has a tremendous amount of
Yeah.
hands in this position.
We see it all over the world. We have slideshows of,
Yeah, yeah.
these positions from all over the world.
Well, I know they're from all over the world, and I, of course, have spent a lot of time in Chaco, but
Of course you
Yeah.
have, yeah.
but I'm just wondering if there's anything that's one peculiar one from Baja that we.
Yeah, we haven't done that.
I like the
That's good
hybrid
question.
and the merging. I like the vulva signs,
Mhm,
the impositions,
mhm.
yeah.
That was a good question, Tony. You know, we
Yeah,
have not,
thank you.
and today's Todd's presentation has opened
Be
up a
fun to
whole
explore
doorway
this
of
further.
continuing the exploration as well.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Todd, an
dancing
absolutely
and
wonderful program.
communities.
You continue to inspire me.
Yeah, Tony, always thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
And thank you, Tony, for recommending Todd for many years and,
Yeah.
and to Todd,
again,
for us.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to say also,
Thank you.
Todd, two points that you mentioned. And one is that, of course, the people who lived on the ocean or lived in these arroyos would want to migrate seasonally, because in the mountains, you need the animals for the skin and the bones and the antlers to do your flint knapping. And you need the wood. You mentioned the wands. You would want the ocean for the shells that they collected for containers. They weren't doing pottery. For the salt, probably for the sea creatures. You'd want to go to the mountains for the flint and the chert, the stonework. So you would want the materials from both environments, right? You would want to be collecting
To
there.
migrate back and forth.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And also the dead. You might have an aversion to the dead, but they certainly were in communication with the ancestors, which is a
Oh, yeah.
different category, and the
Right.
spirit beings around them.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
did you want to further comment on that before we take
Well,
the next?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to something that Tony said. And I don't know if I ever told Tony that I had a peyote experience when I was younger, with some Native Americans in Nevada, because they're allowed to practice, the Paiutes are allowed to practice the Native American religion there. And the experience actually was quite startling, because I got visited by an individual in a vision, in a trance state, and it was Don Quixote, and he's a famous shaman that's associated with peyote, and he started asking me questions, and it was very interesting because I remember distinctly thinking, this is a test. He's asking me these questions because he wants to see how I'm going to answer the questions. And so, and the thing is, I was sitting in a Volkswagen bus, which was my Volkswagen bus, with a couple of other people, and we were just being quiet, meditating, and the guy just appeared in the bus right there with me, with the other people, and they don't see him, of course, because it's not a personal experience with them. But so I'm, thinking, okay, it's a test. He's going to ask me, and so I didn't answer the question. So he says, okay, I got one question for you. What do you want? What do you need? And I said, I don't need anything. I'm good. And he said, all right. And he was gone. So I thought I must have answered the question right. Maybe if I had said I needed something, that would trigger some kind of action or response. So anyway, the reason I bring this up is the fact that there was a vision, a trance that was drug induced, and a person appeared that's not part of my life or I know anything about, made me think about, well, maybe some of these figures that you're seeing in rock art, they've taken stage tour or some other kind of stimulant, or just hiked for 3 days and was dead tired. And maybe they got visited by their ancestors. I do think the ancestor part of it is a big component, because a lot of cultures, ancestors are the most important thing in your life, because they are having an influence on you for good or bad during your life, even though they're somewhere else, because they have that ability, the capacity. And it also, as far as the culture normalcy is concerned, it's a good way to educate people the correct behavior. And if you're not, following the correct behavior, the consequences for you and your family and your community could be very drastic. So I do believe that ancestors are probably represented in the rock art. Absolutely. I feel pretty comfortable about that.
Oh, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But not enemies. I don't subscribe to the idea that these are enemies and that you're tracing the deaths, and because I just don't, in my own experiences and Native American conversations, that's just not.
yeah. Well, also the arrows don't need to be a physical arrow. I mean, look at the famous statue of Santa Teresa with the arrows of ecstasy, right? That in Western art. And there's many types of energy lines that can be depicted with a straight line. So I would be more akin to that interpretation.
Yeah.
If you remember, of course, I don't remember very well what I wrote in my book on South Mountain rock art, but I do remember when something you said about energy lines. I thought, yeah, that's right. I said that in my book there, because I found a lot of petroglyphs where there would be a figure, anthropomorph or something, and then there'd be a line that would be coming out of their hand,
Tony's got his
their
hand.
head, and it'd connect with an animal that's next to it. And I
Right.
thought, this has got to be an intentional depiction. Well, maybe they're expressing energy exchange, or
Right.
power, of some kind. And so I like that idea of energy lines, because I thought about that as well.
And they show up visually in trance sessions. You can see energy lines moving and undulating and connecting.
It's just a great expression of the full spectrum of what the human experience can be. It's like
Yes.
Dr. Goodman used to talk about, is that, this ordinary reality, if we just limit ourselves to that, we're missing out on such a significant part of what the human experience can be. And that if you look at the ancestral history across the planet, they all embraced this idea. They didn't dismiss it so much that
They
Western culture
celebrated
had.
it. It was at the
We
core
lost
of their
we lost something
cosmology.
magical about life itself. So bringing that
Yeah.
magic back into our lives, just leading for what it is without interpretation.
That I am curious about with anthropologists and archaeologists is you study these cultures, you honor these cultures, you listen to the cultures, but we tend to dismiss what they're saying about a larger expanded universe and an energetic and a conscious
We call it
universe,
mythology,
right?
yeah,
We're saying,
myths.
well, that's well and good, but we say it's just a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get universe. And so we'll just say that you're telling us stories, but not really embracing the scope of what they're saying as being a real experience. Oh, it's just drugs. Well, we have a visionary experiences without the drugs.
Right, he's just talking about that. Yeah,
I appreciate your perspective on all this,
yeah,
Todd,
yeah.
and that you're taking it more seriously.
Yeah. And Tony did raise his hand back up. I think he wanted to make a comment to add back.
Okay.
Hello,
Yeah,
Tony.
well, the one thing I don't think I've ever talked to Todd about anything archaeologically without asking about sky reference.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And I just had to hear, did you have any sense, other than the amazing picture looking up with the perspective and the sky in that, but is there any sense of something going on there from the cultural astronomy point of view?
And when you were there gazing up in that perspective that the got forced you, what was your experience? Yeah.
Well, the night sky down there is incredible, as you can imagine, because there's no night pollution, And yes, some people have suggested that there is astronomy in the rock art down there. I haven't actually seen any studies, but when you read the general literature, there's always a reference to the possibility that there's some, astronomy that's being recorded. It would make sense. I don't know any people of the world that don't have some form of astronomy, frankly.
Right.
Todd, what was the latitude out of curiosity?
The latitude, I think it was
Were you in the tropic? Were you in the tropics?
it's semi-tropics.
Semi-tropics.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I found out is that zenith passing of the sun is important in the tropics.
Yes. Oh, yes. And there's
And
been quite a bit written about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that startled me with an experience I had there. So yes, well, thank you very much, Todd.
Oh, thank you. It's
Thank
good
you,
talking
Thanks.
with you again, Tony.
Great
Yeah.
talking to you too.
All right.
James Herod.
Oh, yeah, James is a recent guest that we had on. Hi, James. Yeah.
James does an in-depth study of spirituality, religion, and anthropology. Yeah. Hey, James.
I got so many thought. There's such a great, fantastic presentation. So many thoughts with the part of my brain that does comparative mythology is swimming with like dozens of ideas and questions, and I don't even know where to begin hardly. So the birds with the beaks open, and
Mm.
one had a line coming out of the beak as talking, and
Talking.
when I gave my
But
presentation
what
on
I've said is singing.
singing,
Singing.
Singing, yes.
chanting, singing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And in my presentation on portals and passages, I think I did show the Clovis sculpture from the Hiscox site in New York, where the tip of the Y-stick antler was carved with a bird with its beak open,
Mhm.
and eagle or condor, one or the other. And and that site's a ritual shaman burial site, as we interpret it, Mike Gramley and myself. So you have this similar motif. That's one quick thought of the beak open. And this comes from Siberia. So we have rock art in Siberia, Amur River area would have come over with First Peoples with eagle or and when they came to the North America, condor with that beak open. Second quick thought is the darts and lines. There've been a lot of comments. It's a multi-leveled symbol system. So I agree with everything that's been said. I only add one thing. When I was studying European cave art, where frequently animals have darts over them. And I said, well, what does this mean? And usually people say, well, it's being killed. The animal's being killed. And that didn't make any sense to me whatsoever as a mythologist. So in Mallory's 2-volume book on the pictographs of the Americas, he has a little section on the Midewiwin, Algonquin, birch bark chant, birch bark, where the ritual is delineated on the birch bark material for the Midewiwin medicine ceremony. And in cases where the dart goes across an animal, the informant says, it means this is a spirit being.
Ah,
We're
interesting.
not talking just about everyday concrete animal. We're talking about that, but we're talking in this case, it's a spirit animal. Then on that rock sculpture that was engraved, I've never seen that in a photograph anywhere. That's a stunning thing.
Yeah.
And it's got a head of an animal. And when I look at it, I'm thinking that head sort of looks like a giant sloth. So my question for archaeology is, in the faunal studies of the Baja, were there ever the extinct giant sloths, were they in that area at all?
I would say I don't know, but you know, there was a giant sloth found in southern Arizona.
Oh, Interesting.
Hmm.
So they used to be here. Wow.
Next thought is the red and the black. So I'm constantly thinking of these sites are portals to the other world. What's happening at these portals? So I noticed that well, we have red and black on the anthropomorphic figures side by side. Some of the animals have black on their belly and red across the top of their bodies, like the quadrupeds. And so I thought, and then when I looked at that, I think it was, I can't remember which cave it was, it had the grid at the top of the entrance into the cave that got reversed in the illustration.
Musica.
That
Oh,
grid, color of that grid was red in the front, and as you went into the cave, or if you could go through there, I don't know, but it is black in the back. And of course, there was black on a number of rocks towards the front of that entry or whatever. So the thought is that red represents the middle world and black represents the lower world. That's the first thought that struck me. I have no way to prove it, but I added to the hypotheses.
You're also interpreting based on other cultural motifs, which is interesting. Yeah, as a reference and mythology.
In terms of binders, I know at the Anzik site recently it was the binders, all of the tools other than the elk rod, beveled elk rods, all of the stone tools were painted with a very thick red pigment that was painted on them. Every single one of those 100 and some artifacts. The binder was so good, the paint so thick that when the collectors discovered the site, they had to get out their farm heavy-duty vegetable scrubbers and try and get that paint off. It was really hard to get off, and a lot of it is still on them. Some of the paint residues were recently tested, and they had rabbit blood binder.
A rabbit blood
And-
binder?
In addition
wanted
to
to
plant,
taste
sticky plant, you might, and so many depictions of rabbits, and rabbits in the faunal assemblages, that they might have been being used for a binder.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's interesting too. Yeah.
Well, eggs make a good binder too, so that would be another possibility.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
there's some other binders that we know were used in other places, but I don't think they've done any studies down there. But I want to say something that you just said about the two colors. One of the things that went through my mind when I saw the black and red is that maybe this represents red represents the day and black represents the night. It's symbolic of a cycle.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I've not heard any good explanations as to why black and red in the bicolor.
So just two or three other quick thoughts. One on the rays, bat ray, manta rays. This is a Pacific coastal, it's evident in Pacific coastal archaeology sites and ethnography. And two locations are at the Ohlone sites in the San Francisco Bay Area. They have a lot of, I don't know what frequency, but in the faunal assemblages, there are bat ray spines they find. So these rays, so it's a Pacific coastal entry down the Pacific coast into the new world. So we have that. Then among the Yurok, who are also coastal, but maybe Algonquin related people, among the Yurok, the primary transformer figure, at least according to my readings and ethnography, is I think it's called Widower from Across the Ocean or whatever, and it's a ray. I can't remember if it's a bat ray or a manta ray. Usually it's said it's skate woman. And skate woman is one of the transformer figures. So here again, that motif coming down the Pacific coast. And then just a couple little thoughts on genetics and where is the ethnography for these rock art sites. So as you noted, the human people appear to have come later. So if you in my quick review, I just looked at some of my database on genetics and rock art. For the Baja, there are a number of human tribes. Then there is a group called the Mixtec Baja, and I don't know if they're living across on the other side of the Gulf or they're on the Baja Peninsula itself. But the rock art looks to me to have motifs similar to the ethnography of the Mixtec Baja. And that includes that there is an emergence from the ocean.
Oh, yeah.
And the primary deities, a couple, are a male stag deity and a female goddess deer. So the two deer are the prominent creator figures, and they're strangely called a puma snake and a jaguar snake. So they also, besides being deer images, have some kind of snake imagery associated with them. And and their ethnography is all around balance. Polarities get balanced. So like you said, day, night, whether I say upper and lower, it's red and black, which globally are the two primary pigment colors from beginning in Africa.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Specularite and ochre.
And the Mixtecs are just down south. Yeah.
So there's that. So I think this Mixtec Baja, whose genetics, mitochondrial DNA is totally different from human. And the other group is extinct. At the very tip of the Baja, I don't know how the name is pronounced, maybe it's the Paraguay people. And their genetics, from the Las Palmas culture 800 to 300 years ago, 6 fossils were DNA'd, or mitochondrial DNA. And when I look at the 3 haplogroups, they are a match for the earliest Channel Island DNA. So again, it's the people coming down the Pacific coast. They end up on the end of the Baja. And so I have no mythology or ethnography for those Paraguay people who, as I say, are extinct now.
Yeah.
So I think possibly those 2 cultures, the Mixtec Baja and the Paraguay, had some kind of joint aggregation site in those mountains. They may have done rock art together. They may have done it at separate times. I don't know, but since we don't have the ethnography for the Paraguays, then we don't know. Anyway,
Oh, so many pieces to put on the puzzle
Right.
to see what's going to emerge. Thank you, James.
Yes, you're welcome.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah.
So
Todd, you want to comment on?
I'm not familiar with the Mixtecs of Baja, and I'm just looking on the web, and there's nothing on Mixtecs being in Baja, but it might just be that I'm not familiar with that literature.
I think that they may be just on the other side, and somehow they got the hyphen Baja attached to their name.
Yeah, it could be, yeah, because I'm not familiar with ever seeing that.
And they may have been there and then departed when the humans came.
But I do know you are right that the group at the very south of the Baja, they appear to be an older group, a much older group, and they're extinct now. So there clearly were other groups on Baja previous to when the Spanish came that apparently weren't there when the Spanish arrived.
Yeah.
Another Mixtec Baja motif is when the emergence occurred, the first temple, they say, was made on a cliff.
Oh,
Temple. Huh.
Yeah,
wow. Like a rock art site.
There you
I
go.
appreciate the mythology and the cross comparison of the different
Pushing.
cosmologies and mythologies of these cultures.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then tracing their DNA, their migration routes, and then the cultural transmission. I mean, that's got to be a piece of the whole grand puzzle.
Yeah.
So appreciate your work, James.
Yeah.
And we'll get
Let's-
thank you.
recent talk posted here.
Yeah.
soon.
great
It was
presentation.
another big one.
Yeah.
It was another big talk.
Yeah.
So
James,
Yeah,
thank you
thank you
all.
for that.
Yeah, we're really pushing the conversation forward for sure. And I know Todd, we have time for another question. I know we're
Sure.
going way over time, but
No problem.
Michael has his hand up.
Yes.
Okay, Michael? I lost.
Here I am.
Okay,
You know, we think about altered states of consciousness, what we're seeing with the rock art and so forth, wondering what's going on. I sometimes wonder if all of us are in a trance right now, enter into it that makes birth, and then we go into another state when we supposedly die and leave our bodies behind.
Mhm.
But it's all energy. The rocks are energy, we're energy, and what seems to be solid really isn't, and what isn't seems to be not solid really isn't. And we use these to tell stories, myths. So that's my contribution for what it's worth.
yeah.
Thank you. Getting into the leading edge of quantum physics and also ancient cosmology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say that there's religions that actually believe that the living world is a dream.
Yeah,
Mhm.
So that would be similar to what he said.
yeah, exactly.
We
Yeah.
see it as reality, as the only reality, but in fact, there's a lot of cultures that have multiple realities that they acknowledge.
Yeah,
And for some
And
reason,
the leading
modern
edge of
man-
physics is saying something similar as well. They're exploring time travel. They're exploring multiple
multiple
universes. They're
universes,
exploring multiple dimensions.
yeah.
Yeah.
dimensional.
It's interesting how it's coming full circle here.
Yeah, yeah. Michael, thank you. That
So-
was a good. And then, you see, Kelly, you did have your hand
Good
up for a while. I don't know, I think maybe you got
Yeah.
tired of holding your hand up.
Here we go again. I'm sorry.
Never sorry.
Thank you so much, Todd. This has been amazing.
You're welcome.
I've watched a couple of your YouTube videos the last few days, and I was just really intrigued by everything that you found. I watched something on, I think you called it Kiva.
Kiva, yeah.
You found certain nets and things like that. Like, I was just wondering if they found any other sort of artifacts where you were besides like just the paintings. I mean, I know you said there's no pottery, but
Oh, that's a good question.
Lots of
anything-
artifacts, yeah. And I did show some, lots of stone tools, lots of shell tools, shells that were made into tools, cordage made out of plant material, pieces of baskets, so they were making basketry. So yeah, there's a lot of artifacts that have been found at these sites. Yes.
and there hasn't been a whole lot of searching going on there from what I understand.
No, that was the thing, being an archaeologist, it's always going up to site, 10 or 20 years after I've been there and seeing how much damage or destruction's been done to it. These sites are in really good shape, but it's the Mexican government. I mean, you have to get permission
Mhm.
from, and then some sites, they actually require you that you bring an archaeologist with you, which you have to pay
Mhm.
for.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but when you get to the headquarters, you have to have your passport, and you have to give them your passport.
Okay, well, I'm gonna need instructions for when I go then.
And what I'm just saying is that they're
Don't
very,
forget the well
very
watching as well.
regulated.
Yeah.
What are you
very
gonna say,
well
Todd?
regulated.
I'm sorry, we didn't hear you.
Go ahead, Todd.
I said the government does a really good job of protecting the sites. That's why.
Well, that's good.
And they
Yeah,
should.
that's what we want to hear.
Yeah.
I had one other thing that I wanted to share, and it was about something that Laura said about menstrual lodges.
Oh,
I had it's just kind of crazy, but I had just recently went to another thrift store and bought another book, and it's called Growing Up Indian by Evelyn Wolfson, and all the illustrations are done by a Native American, and it's talking about how the different early Indians and early in tribes, like how they would make the women stay at a certain place for certain days, and have only small amounts of food. And one thing that I don't agree with is it says that visions occur. They wanted them to have visions before they could get married. And so when I look at these pieces that you were showing today, it's just, I can see this, and I can see like the stars in the La Palma one. I can see a crescent moon upside down, and then the arrow pointing down. I can see different depictions of the stars. And then I can just see this. I can just see this in my mind. What I was reading yesterday was because when they would go into trance, that it says visions occur when a person is awake and differ from dreams, which occurred during sleep. Girls were encouraged to have visions while they chopped wood, they sewed, weaved, or listened to the older women. Well, how about if they wanted to paint or they were an artist? I don't know. Some of them were there for 3 days at a time, and you get very little food, and it was made not to be comfortable. So I just felt like some of the layering and stuff was, I just thought that was crazy that Laura said that. And I just feel like it might have some importance.
yeah,
Because that's a big thing for a woman.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I one of my favorite sayings is a Zen saying, and a Zen master was asked, "What's the meaning of life?"
Hmm.
And he said, "Chop wood, carry water."
Yeah,
That was the meaning of life. And I've thought a lot about that, and it makes a lot of sense to me now, actually. And the meaning of life is just to do something productive. That's
Yeah.
all it is. And that you as a person is determining what's productive by your actions.
yeah,
And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of Native American groups in the Southwest who had pilgrimages that they did, and the pilgrimage was designed to create visions. And the Tohono O'odham, for example, here in southern Arizona, they at a certain age were required to walk down to the Steve Cortez, interestingly enough,
A pilgrimage. Yeah.
and have a conversation with the spirits of the ocean, because that was the most powerful spirit possible. Water was powerful, and then of course in the ocean, and gather salt, and then come back with dreams, and those dreams would set their future for them, because they would have to memorize the dreams and the stories that they learned in the dreams, and then those stories they would tell the rest of their lives. So I think that's not that uncommon to do a pilgrimage. And I think there may be a pilgrimage going inside the Baja, San Francisco mountains, for example. I mean,
sure.
you didn't necessarily have to live there to go there and want to experience the spiritual qualities of it. You could just be going there because you've been told, or you were asked to
Sacred
go, or
gathering spot. Yeah,
Or imagine going to that Three Virgin volcano to collect all that different ochre. That would be a whole spirit journey.
Yes.
Look at the Native women who go to a certain hillside to collect the clay for their pots. It's ceremonial. It's a quest. You're in communion with Mother Earth. She's gifting you this sacred substance. You do that with ritual. You do that with intent. You do that with a heart full of gratitude. And what about right action? If we're so distracted in our culture, but if you take all that away, you're reading the environment, you're communing with the sky and the ocean and the land and the beings and the creatures and the plants, right? You're right there. I've had experiences where, in a desert environment where I wasn't drinking enough water. This was in Israel on a school journey. I'm out there communing with the sky until somebody came up and said, you're really dehydrated and you really need to drink this water. Came right back down. But the environment itself picks you up and transports you. I mean, I just think it's such a different life. And of course you'd be communing with the spirits.
Yeah.
They're speaking to you.
Thank you, Kelly.
So yeah, thank you, Kelly.
Yeah,
for
you. Thank you
So-
so much. I really enjoyed this. I learned a lot and I saw some amazing things in some of those pictures. When you were saying, I wish someone would say what they thought this is, I really wanted to keep saying what I thought it was.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Journal
I
it.
don't know if I could get your email. I know I've been wanting to talk to James too, because I've grown so much here and I've been learning so much from all of you. So I really appreciate it.
Hey,
Yeah, thank you. It's so
Absolutely.
wonderful that
I
these
don't have a
efforts will-
degree, so I can just say whatever I think and I'm not going to lose it.
You're not
How
going to lose
about
the
that?
credentials.
Indeed.
Thank you,
I
Kelly.
feel the same way. What do I
Thank
have?
you.
An MA in English literature
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
you know,
we're-
like a
we're
lot of
just-
our history classes.
So-
and it allows me to be free to
Mhm.
interpret. Thank you so much. Todd, you've got a whole story on the hydrology of the Hohokam and these canals. I mean, the largest canal system ever. I would have thought it was the Maya. No, it's the Hohokam in the New World. You've got stories on Southwest archaeology, rock art all over. I hope you come back. The V-Bar-V Heritage Site. Oh, by the way, when we talked to Ken Zoll, I know that you're Director of Archaeology Emeritus for the Archaeological Center of the Rudy Valley that he co-founded, but he talked about this symbol. And I saw this on the side in one of the rock art pieces. And Ken, I was going to ask you, Ken interpreted this for us as saying, here's the journey of the sun from solstice, right? Summer. Here's the journey at the equinox. Here's the journey, the winter. It's a much shorter journey. And so you put all those together and you would see a circle because the sun obviously goes underground as well during the night. And so I was just wondering, do you see any kind of celestial formation there or solar sites?
Mm.
He was describing how easy it is to create solar markers because you watch where the sun happens to strike on the solstice. You put a petroglyph there, often a spiral or a
Right.
concentric circles. Well, he said the concentric circles were the guild sign of the sky watchers. A spiral would be there. You watch on the winter solstice and you put another spiral there. You watch how it naturally is set up to bisect it, or maybe you tweak it a little bit with a gnomon or two or a certain. Did you see things like that there?
Well, I showed you that one sign that had the green dots. That was similar elements, actually.
Yeah, that's where it had the
Mm.
Right, yeah.
so,
Astronomy takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
You just gotta
and
spend a lot of time-
generations of observation. And so they had histories that they were passing along.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
but when you have no other distractions at night, you've got a night sky to watch
Yeah.
and you're going to track it,
Mm.
right? You're going to be specialists among you to track it. Also, seems to have been art specialists because there was one site, I think they described a 26-foot long panel that they think was created by one artist. So obviously specialists came forward to paint some of these murals, it would appear,
Yeah.
right?
True. Maybe I can finish this with my story I was telling you about my hospital visit after my last
Yes,
trip.
please.
Please, yeah.
In my last trip in November, I wanted to see La Pintada, as you saw, was a spectacular sight. And so I went down and on another mule ride, and I got sick when I was down there. I got really low energy, and I just had a hard time doing anything, although I did manage to do the whole trip when I got out. As soon as I got out, though, I had to be hospitalized, and I went to the emergency room, and in the emergency room, I asked, what was wrong, and they said, well, you've got bleeding ulcers, and it's a good thing you're here because you could die from this, Anyway, I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, at least I'm in good hands and stuff. But while I'm in the emergency room, there's all these people coming and going, and in the particular hospital I was at, Dignity Health, they wear either red or blue uniforms. They're really beautiful, bright colored uniforms. And so I'm watching all this red and blue coming in, and I'm under the influence of morphine because I'm really hurting badly. And but so all these people coming and going, but then there's one person that walks into the room dressed all in black with a black hat and carrying a black case, like you guys are, all black. And as you know, that caught my attention because that's not what the uniform they wear in that hospital, And the person came up to me took a brief look at me, shook his head and walked away.
Oh,
And I am convinced that I was visited by death. And that he came to check on me and said, no, you're not ready yet.
ah,
Oh, wow. That is pretty startling. And
Yeah,
it looked just like a person.
just like a
I mean, you
person
were under
dressed
the
all in
influence of
black instead
morphine
of the
for
blue
pain.
or the maroon uniforms that everyone else is
Yeah.
wearing. And a hat. No one was wearing a hat. And carrying a briefcase,
Wow. And what did he say to you?
He didn't say a word. He just looked at me and then
Mhm.
shook his head and walked off.
hmm.
I knew right then I knew what was happening to me. I mean, I didn't go, oh, wow, it was an instant later. And so, but the reason I mention this is because, again, it's another example of being visited, I think, in the spirit world, because I was at the edge there with the morphine and, I was anemic, I had really low iron, very low, dangerously low iron.
You were near death.
Yeah, it was close. And so, but again, it showed me that, when your body goes through extreme physical activity or drugs or whatever, and you have visions that sometimes you don't create the vision comes to you,
Yes.
like it did here.
Mhm.
And it had a message because I felt a lot better. I felt like, okay, I guess I'm going to be okay,
Wow. And you just,
So, and I find that interesting that happened right at the end of going through this spiritual experience with all the rock art.
Mhm.
So I bring that up because again, it's an example of being visited by people from the spirit world.
Mhm.
That, a lot of people I would tell that and they go, you're crazy.
But those
It was not-
encounters are so healing and so profound and so meaningful that it's no wonder that these societies would cultivate that, to put oneself in a position safely to open the door, to open the portal, to have those encounters, right? Because there's just such a long-standing covenant and an arrangement between the realms
Yeah.
in those.
Yeah, and
we
I don't wonder if they're not teaching their kids about alternate reality at a young age.
yeah.
Or is this something that happens when you transition into the puberty stage?
Hmm.
Mhm.
Once they reach a puberty stage, that's when they start telling them about, hey, life has got different realities, and these are
Right.
ways you can access them. I mean, how does one create the concept of the spirit world, and when do you
Direct
tell your
experience.
kids
we
about
say.
that?
Yeah. And also maybe potentially the cosmology, it's all inclusive. It's not, we have a tendency to separate between ordinary reality and alternate reality, or whatever you want to use the terminology of spirit world versus
Yeah.
the physical world. And yet maybe in this cosmology, there's no separation. It's one world view of experience, potentially that from the day that the child is born, that's the world.
Mhm.
It's not like,
Pay
well,
attention
yeah,
to your dreams and pay attention to your
all of it. Yeah,
intuition.
the
And
dream world is the
and-
world,
and
and the physical
anthropologists would
world is.
describe Australian Aboriginal elders that could walk through doorways between the realms, like you and I walk through these
They
doorways.
can,
And that can be talking to that anthropologist they describe while being in contact with their ancestors or members of the
right,
tribe
yeah.
far away.
So that's the fun
So-
part of this. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Todd, wow, fantastic, and thank you so
I just wanna
much.
say one more
Okay,
thing.
go ahead.
They were so concerned with being in right action, as you referenced earlier,
Yeah,
that these are the guides to help us stay in right
that's
action.
correct.
That this is our neighborhood, the whole cosmos, and it has so much energy and so much to teach us. And
Mhm.
we need to be open to that, to truly be who we are, to truly walk our destiny and to
Mhm.
show up and be our full selves. Right. And we're finding that as well. You just need to show up, pay attention, and embrace the world at large to truly do your duty, to truly be a responsible member of the web of life, to truly honor the fact that you're here now. You're given this gift of life.
And
So,
And I would argue you need to read or talk to other people that have spiritual experiences and
right.
find out, how did it affect them and how did they interpret it? And because
Well-
a lot of things that I've come to a conclusion, or as I've mentioned from my own personal experiences. know,
Yeah.
it's just, oh, this is what the literature says, and this is what my colleagues say.
Yeah.
I have that. Well, like, for example, something you just said, I want to bring that up, something that bothers me, and I've actually mentioned this to my colleagues. You see in the literature and in the rock art, and as well as other archaeology literature, that the archaeologists like to split the world into secular and religious.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, these are secular artifacts, these are religious, this is a secular site, it's a religious site, secular panel. I won't even use the word secular. I
Right.
don't think it exists in those people's mind. It's all ritual, it's all religion. And
Yes. Because
yeah.
they themselves
say
say
something is
all the
secular,
world
to
is
me,
sacred.
it's like taking its life out of it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, I think it's a misnomer that got, you know, in the literature, and it's really hard to get it out now.
And
Mm.
look at what that worldview where has it taken us, right? The world's in crisis, our environment's in crisis, we're in crisis. So that worldview of separating the two has
Oh,
not served us very
That
well.
worldview of separation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well,
we all need to get back into right action and right relationship with our universe and our world.
maybe going back
Yeah.
to the beginning of our conversation, when you said you're always a little bit cautious going to a dinner party and mentioning that you're an archaeologist, because people will automatically want to ask questions. And I think it's not necessarily that people are looking for factual data. People are looking for something to understand the human experience. And they see archaeology as an opportunity to say, hey, what
Open the box
what did
of
the
these early
ancestors know that
cultures,
we don't know now?
exactly.
And how can I get a part of that? How can I taste that? What is that that's going
Yeah.
on? What, you know, so it's not an intellectual process. I think there's a hunger within us to want to reconnect to the deepest part of
Yeah.
what it means to be human.
I agree with that completely. That was well said.
Yeah.
And you've had such a privileged seat in your career, and you've done so many
You've worked it.
wonderful
You've
adventures.
worked it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for all that. Thank you for this today. Any last words?
Keep on trucking.
Keep on going. And I know you're
Thank
working
you.
on a new publication. You told me this week you were just slammed on the final chapter of a
What's it about?
It's a book by the University of Utah Press on the history of New Deal archaeology of the Western United States. So it's which had never been written before. So we got all these people together, and we've written about how the New Deal spent money on archaeology, which was huge amounts of money, by the way. It was a lot of people are not aware of that. During the New Deal, more archaeology got done than ever.
Wow. So
And
so much
that's
support.
it's an interesting book. I worked with a colleague on Southern Arizona, but I have another article coming out, a long article coming out in a journal that's more similar to the talk I just gave, and it's about an archaeological site that we excavated in north of Tucson, and it got completely covered over by sheet wash. And so when we excavated over 100 houses, they still had their floor sandwiches in them.
Oh my.
I could reconstruct the activities that were going on in the floors of the houses versus a ball court that we had that had a burial of the chief in the ball court, and then the village was abandoned with his burial in the ball court.
Oh my.
So what I did was I looked at, and some colleagues looked at the distribution of artifacts that we consider ritual to see who was in charge of religion at the site. And so that's a different perspective. You know, it's not rock art, it's actually the material culture, but it's the same processes, same types of understanding to.
Same story to
Anyway, well,
yeah.
thank you for everyone for showing up and watching.
Yeah,
Any
thank you,
last
Todd.
questions?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.